Good evening and welcome. Thank you for being here. And I don't think I need to spend any time giving any kind of introduction, so why don't I just invite Ronny to come up and share?
And I'm waiting, Pastor, for a long, embarrassing introduction as you usually do. And now this. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you all for coming. I can tell that some of you were not here yesterday or day before yesterday, and if you missed the whole seminar so far, you're joining us for the last two sessions, and we've been going into some details to learn about Jerusalem. We started 2 evenings ago, and we started with the city's geography and topography. We went through the days of the first temple. We went through the days of David, Solomon, and all the other kings of Judah. We spoke about Nehemiah rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem. We spoke about the Greek impact on the world and the city included. And then we spoke about the Roman town when Jerusalem came to its climax. We spoke about the days of Constantine, how the city changed its appearance as the whole Roman Empire is embracing a new religion from being pagan to be Christian. And the last session yesterday spoke about Islam and how the Muslims came to town, what was their impact on the city. And as I said, that was my last comment, that Jerusalem is now holy to 3 religions, which is a very flattering situation for the city, but quite a dangerous one as well. It will be fair to say that from a certain point in history, the only interest that people showed or people had in the country was not the road system, was not the strategic location. It was indeed Jerusalem, and the main interest was now religious and not strategic. You need to understand that until the days of Constantine, Israel was a significant location because of its strategic location. Everybody was interested to occupy the land because the main trade routes went through this narrow bottleneck called Israel. This was no longer the case. The only reason for countries and empires to show interest in Jerusalem now is the religious factor. So now the city is holy to Jews that were not permitted even to visit the town, to Christians that lost their hegemony but still making the majority in the city, and also to Muslims. And today we're going to bring this seminar to conclusion by speaking about few eras that are going to add another important layer to understand the city's history. We'll start with the Crusaders. We'll speak about the Latin Kingdom of Jerusalem. That would be the official name of it. And the only time in history that Jerusalem was a capital and not of the Jewish people will be the capital of the Crusaders. Keep in mind that even when the country was in Muslim hands and Jerusalem was proclaimed the Muslim holy site, it wasn't the capital. The capital was a town that was built by the Muslims closer to the coast on the main highway. It makes much more sense because Jerusalem is off the main highways. So Jerusalem served as a very important place to many people. It was never capital, except for the Jewish people and the Crusader kingdom. We'll speak about the city divided later on between Jordan and Israel, and I will tell you, the west part of town was proclaimed by Israel to be its capital. The east part of town was not the capital of Jordan. And therefore, Jerusalem has a rich history, but it only served as capital only for the Jewish people and a very short term for the Latin Kingdom of Jerusalem or the Crusader Kingdom. A fascinating chapter in the country's history and Jerusalem as well. We'll speak about the reasons for the First Crusade, and then we'll speak about the Crusaders arrived to Jerusalem, conquered the city, and after 400 years of Muslim presence in town, it is once again in Christian hands. I'm taking a sidetrack for just a minute to speak about the term Crusader. Well, if you use that term in the Middle East, and you use that when you have a conversation with a Muslim, for example, the term Crusader is a very negative one. It's not the Billy Graham crusade that people have in mind in the Middle East when you mention the term Crusader. Crusader, for the mindset of the locals, will be foreigners that don't belong here, come very aggressively and conquer a land, and they're going to lose to Islam. And for that reason, the Muslim countries call the State of Israel a Crusader entity. Just like these foreigners came from Europe and conquered the land for a while, and we were able to overpower them, the same thing will happen to the Jewish state. So the term Crusader in the Middle East is a very negative one. When people use that term, it's unlike in the West, fighting for a good cause, for example. It means something totally different. So the Crusaders were successful for a while, but the impact of the Crusade is something which lives in the memory of the Muslim world until this very day. Because foreigners came from Europe and were striking the very heart of Islam, able to conquer Jerusalem, first Christians and now the Jews. So for the mindset of the locals, and you hear that in their propaganda, the messages, we are called by them Crusaders. When you guys went to conquer Iraq to destroy Saddam Hussein, they also called it in their media a crusade of the Americans. The term Crusader for the mindset of the people in the Middle East is a very negative term. So that's how it started. We're going back now to this colorful chart. And boy, we covered quite a lot how we started here. And look at all these colors and the ladder that we climbed almost to the very top of it. We're going to speak now about a very short period in the city's history, only 88 years, that left quite a mark behind. So we speak about something that started in Europe, and just the backstory very briefly, if I may. We'll go for about an hour and 50 minutes, as we usually do. We'll break for about 50 minutes, and we'll come back later on in case you forgot the routine. How do we run that? And now when I have the watch right in front of me and the big clock over there, I know that I need to keep the time. I'm taking you back now to 1095. That's the year. It's the 26th of November. That happened to be a Sunday back then. And something will happen in a small town in France called Clermont, which is going, if you wish, to launch this whole era that will be called the Crusaders. The Pope, Urban II, was on a journey. And the purpose for the journey was to excommunicate the King of France, Louis VII, that was accused or committed adultery, and the Pope was very unhappy. He's a Catholic king. He set a poor example. The Pope was on a crusade, if you can say that, to try to get rid of the King of France. And in the last session of a conference that we held in, he approached the French aristocracy and all the knights in the church there and delivered a message. Unfortunately, we lost the message itself, but we have evidences of people that attended that session, and they give us a report about the Pope's call. The idea was, it's about time, Christian friends, that we should go back to Palestine, to the Holy Land, and liberate the Christian holy sites from the Muslims. It wasn't the first time that the Pope had such an idea, but this time, the time was right. You need to understand that the motivation for the Crusades was not just religious. It is true that we speak about the religious motivation. There was more to the story. About 50 years earlier, 1054, the great schism of the church had occurred. The Christian world is now divided into two. The Greek Orthodox world, which was the eastern part of the Christian world, and the Catholic world, which will be the western part of the Christian world, the Latin-speaking part versus the Greek-speaking part. As a result of the schism, the Pope was losing about 30% of his power, his influence, his believers, his income. And therefore, to lead an army of Catholics into the Greek Orthodox area, that's where Israel was also an opportunity to try to reunite the Christian world, so the Pope will gain his previous position that he lost as a result of the Great Schism. That will be one reason, but not the only one. There was indeed a religious motivation, because people that responded to the call, they had more religious issues than politics. But when you try to check, how come? The Pope was able to recruit, if you wish, more than 200,000 people, and was leading them, at least not physically, but he was the man behind the project. We have to understand the reasons. So number one, it was an opportunity to try to reunite the Christian world under his leadership. Another problem was that until then, Europe was fighting for its survival to try to stop the armies of Islam for centuries. The Muslim armies invaded European territory. They came from Spain and crossed the Alps into the very southern part of France and were stopped. They were pressing very hard from Turkey, Asia Minor. Europe was a continent without a leadership, fighting for its survival. And if that was not enough, then the Danes and the Vikings were landing on the shores of England and Ireland and France. Europe did not have the strength or the motivation to even consider to send an army and leave the kingdoms unprotected into Israel to Jerusalem to liberate the holy places, it was an impossibility. The 9th century was a turning point because many of the Viking tribes decided to accept Christianity. So now you have people who are willing to fight for Christendom, people that were the former enemies, and the fact that they were converted did not stop their savage nature or behavior for a long time. You can use the former enemies now to fight for the Christian world. That was the turning point. So the 11th century saw a major change. Now it was doable. You no longer have to protect your northern shores from the Vikings. They are your allies. And the European kingdoms will need to get together under the Pope's leadership to try to connect or to reunite the Christian world. But it was something even more than that. When you speak about Palestine or Israel as a Christian kingdom or a Christian empire, the Byzantines, well, these were Greek Orthodox. Catholics basically never controlled Jerusalem. And this part of the story is not told well enough, but we have to say there was a struggle within the Christian world to have Jerusalem in Catholic hands and not just in Christian hands, which means Greek Orthodox hands. It's quite amazing, but once the Crusaders conquered Jerusalem, the first people they got rid of were the local Greek Orthodox Christian clergy. So that was the real motivation, not just to have Jerusalem in Christian hands, to have it in the hands of the Pope, in the hands of the Catholics, and the time was right. So the Pope is bringing up this crazy idea. It's about time, Christian brothers, that we should go to the Holy Land to liberate it from the Muslims. And this time, Europe is responding. But there was a little problem. The continent was so divided, and the Pope did not have any armed forces, you understand. He needed the kings of Europe to lead such a crusade to conquer Palestine, the Holy Land, to the Christian world once again. And who will be the kings that will leave behind the kingdom unprotected to join the Pope? You do understand the problem. If I'm going to join the Pope or his court, and I'm going to take my army with me and leave my kingdom unprotected, it's dangerous. So if my neighbor is not going, I'm not going. If not everybody is going, nobody is going. That would be the main dilemma. But since the Pope had the power to excommunicate you, and that was a real threat to the kings of Europe, they found a compromise. I'm going to send one of my sons and part of my army, because I need to stay back home, as long as my neighbor is sending one of his heirs and part of his army. Amazing, the first crusade, the most successful one, did not have a leader. The kings refused to come. But not to be excommunicated by the Pope that you're not doing his will. That was a compromise. I'm going to stay back home, protect my realm, but I'm going to send one of my sons. I may solve a domestic problem as well, because when I'm gone and I have 3 kids, they're going to fight for the throne. By sending one of them to the Orient, I'm minimizing the problems of a civil war after I'm gone. So a few years pass by, and on French soil, 200,000 people are getting together on their way to the Holy Land. 200,000 people, not professional soldiers. We speak about people. We speak about farmers, people that just joined the crusade to enjoy some financial gain, because the kings made a promise. If you are going to take the cross and go to Jerusalem, we're going to take care about your family, and whatever you conquer along the way will be yours. In a society that farmers were treated almost like slaves, they were not legally, but peasants without a chance to elevate the standard of living, without a chance to change the social structure, it was an opportunity. So I'll take the chance. I leave the family behind, and somebody will take care about them, and who knows, what can I conquer along the way to bring them with me? That was also part of the motivation. And of course, a religious zeal, a genuine one, to have Christian sites in Christian hands. The problem was the Christian sites were in Christian hands, but in the hands of the Greek Orthodox and not in the hands of Catholics. So that great schism was the main reason for the Pope to try to reunite the Christian world under his authority, because in the Byzantine Empire, some of you may remember that term, the king was also the pontiff, which means the king was also the head of the church. In the Western countries, that was not the case. So if you live in a country like France, and you're supposed to serve 2 masters, one is the king and one is the Pope, what does the king offer? Protection in most cases, but you pay heavy taxes. what does the Pope offer? Come on, you know the answer. Salvation, eternal life, eternity. So who you are going to choose to follow as leader, the king or the Pope? That was always that dilemma. We speak about the Pope, the most bitter adversary of the kings of Europe. It was one way to try to unite the whole continent together, because if I'm going to follow the Pope's commands, basically, that will settle the argument. I'm following him, he is superior. And for that reason, the kings refused to come, not to admit officially that they are dragging, so to speak, behind the Pope, just to tell you the backstory. So there is a whole army of people that are making the way now to Palestine, and this army of people doesn't have a leader, and first they have to fight their way through. I mean, let's say that 200,000 people are just walking through somebody's country. The local king had to be completely insane to give them permission to cross his territory. We speak about a mob. Who is going to control them? These people are going to steal, and they're going to loot and to plunder and to rape. We're not giving permission to go through. So the first mission was just to find a way to go through the kingdom of Hungary and then the kingdom of Serbia on your way to finally clash with the Muslim forces. The first crusade, very violently, had to go through Christian territory, and long before they engaged with the Muslims, a lot of damage was done to Central Europe by the armies of the first crusade. And guess what happened along the way? You did find a nice piece of land, you killed the honor, and you're staying. And you send messengers back home to tell the family, I had a great piece of land, come and join me. About 25% of the Crusaders never made it to Israel. Many of them simply found a nice piece of land. That was the end of the crusade for them. Many others died along the way. Many others understood that the journey is so challenging, they simply quit it and went back home. Out of 200,000 people that started the march from French soil in 1096, about 50,000 people, 25%, officially arrived to Palestine about 3 years later. Some died along the way, some stayed along the way. And if you are a nobleman, if you are an aristocrat, and you found a nice piece of land, it's not just that you're staying. You're going to take all those other peasants that conquer a piece of land and create a small kingdom. On the way to Jerusalem, 3 kingdoms were created by the Crusaders long before the main army even arrived to Jerusalem. So that was the nature of the first crusade, the most successful one, the one that did conquer the city, that did not have an official leader. And therefore, we speak about a challenge. We speak about a lot of disasters along the way. And this part of the story is not told well enough. But if you speak about a Christian army making the way without any discipline, who will be the first target along the way? Anybody wants to guess? The Jewish communities. About 100,000 Jews were massacred just along the way in German territory, in French territory. All the path of the first crusade left behind, devastated the Jewish communities. Think about the mindset. We are a Christian army. We're going to get rid of Christ's killer. That will be the title given to the Jews. As we are full of zeal and full of motivation on our way to Jerusalem, it was a very unpleasant outcome of the first crusade. And this part is always ignored in the story, but it was indeed part of the first crusade. And 3 years after walking, finally, they arrived to the gates of Jerusalem. Since there was no official leader for the crusade, they lay siege around the city. Takes them about 3 weeks, and after 3 weeks of a siege, they are breaking through the northern part of the wall. Some of you may remember, because 2 days ago I did mention to you that each time the city was conquered, the enemy was breaching the northern wall. That was the easiest one to access without having any deep valley protecting the northern side. Every invasion, every assault on Jerusalem, the northern side was the vulnerable one. The Crusader army is breaking through the walls of Jerusalem, and there is a total bloodbath in the city. We are told by the Crusader historians that everybody who was in town was simply massacred. That will include the local Christian clergy. It will include some Jews, because the Muslims were more tolerant and did allow the Jews to live in the city, and of course the local Muslims. And after they celebrated the victory, They did that basically in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. You see, when the Pope was inviting those kings to join, the call was, we have to go and liberate the Holy Sepulchre from the hands of the Saracens or the Muslims. I'll say it once again, the church was not in the hands of the Muslims, the country was, it was in the hands of the Greek Orthodox. It was just good for the Catholics to proclaim them as an enemy, because Jerusalem has to be now not just in Christian hands, has to be in Catholic hands. There was some sensitivity in the whole story, and the first king of Jerusalem refused to take the title king. Jesus is king. I'm not going to call myself king of Jerusalem in the town where Jesus suffered and was crucified and then was resurrected. So the title that was given to the first king was the protector of the Holy Sepulchre. It wasn't a kingdom yet. They still tried to understand how to run the city, because most of the local population stayed in town. People came back to the city after those that were murdered basically were buried, and there were not enough Christians in the city. Because you see, many of the Crusaders did not come to stay. They came to conquer. They came to maybe make a name for themselves. They had no intention to stay. They're going back home. I'm taking a sidetrack for a minute. In the 11th century, 12th century and on, Europe had witnessed quite an amazing phenomenon. A lot of aristocrats that had the title and had blue blood, so to speak, were stripped off, if you wish, their possessions. We speak about famine. We speak about disasters. So you keep the title, but you don't have the means, all right, to be a real aristocrat. So the few pennies that you have, you'll buy a horse, and you'll buy some armor, and you buy a nice sword, and you try to catch the attention of a powerful lord, hoping he's going to offer you a job. And for that reason, Europe was a very violent continent. There were groups of knights riding from place to place, try to instigate the local just to go for a fight so they can prove themselves as mighty warriors, and maybe somebody will offer them a job. The whole idea of tournaments was that reason. You want to kill each other? Let's make it in a civilized way. You want to catch somebody's attention? Let's make a sport out of it. And the winner of the tournament will get a job. There's only one exception. If you are going to spill Muslim blood, that's okay. So in order to get yourself a name, you take your horse and you take your sword and you go to fight the Muslims, and then you go back home and you tell stories about how many people you killed over there, and you get the attention of the European masters. Maybe somebody will offer you a job. Most Crusaders refused to stay in Jerusalem. Most of the people went back home. Now, how can you run a country when you only have 50,000 people at your disposal? How many soldiers you can recruit from 50,000 men, women, children? That became to be the main problem, demographics. They simply did not have enough people in Jerusalem or in the country, because they were hoping that we are going to be the pioneers. We are the bridgehead. Europe will be so impressed by what we did, the masses are going to follow. And people did come, but not to stay. People came to visit the holy sites, just like they did in the days of Constantine and on. People did not come to be part of the Crusader kingdom. They came to visit, and they went back home. Demographics was the main obstacle for the Crusaders, because the country was inhabited by close to 2 million Muslims. They were taken by surprise. The Christian knights really surprised them and shocked them, but not for too long. Once they will consolidate the forces, the Crusader kingdom didn't stand a chance. So the problem was indeed in the numbers. And the hope was people are going to join us. They never did. So what happened basically was that the local Crusader society blended in the local society. If you start intermarrying and you start embracing the Muslims' habits and customs, even as an army, you change your nature. Sometimes you change part of your religion. It was a strange situation. People came as mighty heroes. They succeeded to conquer the country and Jerusalem, but the only chance to survive was to bring more people to town. So how can you really encourage people to come? You offer tax benefits. For example, how trivial, like today. They made a couple of laws that if you're coming to the city and you're living in the city for a short time, the property that you occupied will be yours. They needed the people. So Jerusalem still looks the same as it was before it was conquered. It looks the same from the Roman era, the same streets, the same walls, just different population, this time Europeans. Keep in mind that we spoke about the Byzantines, Christians, they were the locals and not foreigners that came from the European continent. Local pagans that converted to Christianity, they made the population of the city in the Byzantine era. These were the people that the Muslims conquered. For the first time ever that Christian foreigners come to the city, these are indeed the Crusaders. So this will be a very challenging time, and they tried to survive somehow, and they tried to bring people to town, but once again, not that many people came. But it was an opportunity. For example, many pilgrims came to visit the holy places because now it was possible. So we speak about a lot of people come, they write diaries about their journey, and we get quite a lot of information how the city looked like in the Crusaders' days. We have a lot of Jewish pilgrims that also come to visit the city. Now that's interesting because in the first Christian era, the Byzantines, Jews were not allowed to visit Jerusalem. Now with the Crusades, they are allowed because Jews brought money with them and businesses, and the city needed that source of income. So really just a picture of Jerusalem, that's an impression of the city, and they had hundreds of such pictures that you find all around Europe. This is coming from a prayer book of a nun that visited Jerusalem. She decorated everything. A professional painter made the painting out of it. That was the impression of Jerusalem by foreigners. The city didn't look like that. But we are getting more information as a result of the many visitors that came to town. The Crusader era was definitely something that Jerusalem did not see before. So just some main observation over there about the struggle of the Catholics, Greek Orthodox, etc., and the fact that Jerusalem basically did not change its appearance. The walls are the same walls. You know the picture quite well. There are two main roads and forequarters and Temple Mount over here. So when the Crusaders come to conquer the city, basically in the first Christian era, Temple Mount was the dump, remember? That was the rubbish bin of Jerusalem. You would assume that the new Christian society is going to follow the Byzantine way to demolish the Muslim buildings and to make Temple Mount a dump once again, something they chose not to do. So the Crusaders are changing a few things in the city, and there was a lot of construction goes on as well. You see, every king in Europe wanted to have the reputation to add to his coat of arms that he built something in Jerusalem, that he invested in Jerusalem. It was an opportunity to glorify your name. Money comes in, and just like Europe is divided to kingdoms, so is Jerusalem. Every kingdom will send a delegation. So there was a quarter of the people from Pisa in Italy, and a quarter of the people from Barcelona. Jerusalem became to be a miniature of the European continent. And lo and behold, whenever the kingdoms fought against each other in Europe, it reflected immediately on the local situation. The neighborhoods in Jerusalem would engage against each other just like they did in Europe. So think about a kingdom that has a king that tries to run the kingdom and nobody is under his authority. Because if you're missing people and you want to attract people to come to fill up the capital, these people have some conditions. We are willing to come, but we want to be completely free. Economically, financially, politically, we're not serving the kingdom. We are serving the homeland, and we don't care much about serving the local kingdom. So there was a kingdom, there was a king, and his authority is zero. So in his distress, the king was asking the Pope, listen, I need to control the kingdom somehow, help me. The Pope had a great idea. I'm going to give permission, he said, to monks and train them to be warriors. That's how the Knight Templars were born, and the Hospitallers, and all the military orders. They were founded out of a distress. The king did not have enough people under his command. He needed some help, and special groups were formed. The only time that the Vatican ever, or the Christian world, or the Catholic world gave permission officially, right, to shed blood or to be engaged in war was in that occasion. You're founding military orders. The Knight Templars are maybe the most famous one, but not the only ones. So now you have a professional army. But think about a monk who is a warrior. There's a problem here. Monks are not supposed to be warriors. and they became to be the elite forces of the Crusader kingdom. So you do not control what's going on because you gave those people a lot of freedoms and rights, and one of the rights that they demanded will come to live in Jerusalem, but you have no authority over us. But if you come from Barcelona, you build a neighborhood Barcelona style. If you come from Paris, you build your neighborhood Parisian style. Jerusalem was blessed by that. The city is dotted by about 20 different small neighborhoods, each one representing a country from overseas. Outre-mer, it was called in France, over the sea. That was the name of the kingdom. And visiting Jerusalem was like visiting an open-air museum. You're going from one quarter to the other, and each one is built different style. Each one has its own currency. You understand the confusion here? You try to run an economy, you don't even know the exchange rate, because every group there is loyal not to the kingdom, but to the kingdom back home. So it was indeed a complete mess to try to control that, but very vivid, very lively, very colorful. And we have the stories given to us by the pilgrims about the nature of Jerusalem back at the time. So once again, you don't see because it's too small over there, but these are the names of some of these quarters and some of these neighborhoods, each one representing a different country and kingdom in Europe. The walls are the same walls, and they are there from the Roman era. Temple Mount is over here, the Central Valley, Mount Moriah, all of it, the Upper City, the Valley of Gehenna. I'm repeating names that you should be familiar with by now if you attended the last two services. If not, well, I'm sorry, too late. I'm not going to repeat all of them, but I'm sure that some of you do remember. The only thing that changed also in the walls of the city, that they built the big cross, marking the breaching point that will be over there. So when people approached Jerusalem from the north, there was a huge cross that was standing on the walls of the city, marking the place where the armies of the Crusaders were breaching through the city walls when they conquered the city in 1099. Much attention was given, of course, to Temple Mount. That's Temple Mount. You do have the Dome of the Rock, and we spoke about the reasons why it was built and what's a connection to Islam. You do have the Mosque of Al-Aqsa. You would suppose that these will be destroyed by the Crusaders. They did not. What they did basically was that they replaced the crescent with a cross and called the building Templum Domini, the Temple of God. They made the Mosque of Al-Aqsa here to be basically the palace of the king, and later on the headquarters of the Knight Templars. The Knight Templars were born 1118 in that building over there. So Temple Mount now is not the dump. Temple Mount is one of the main centers of Jerusalem under the Crusaders. And there's something amazing here. You do see, what's hard to see, well, this building is an 8-sided building. Why it is designed in such a way, I did touch on that the other day, because that was the way that Christians used to build the early churches. An 8-sided building shaped like an octagon because of the 8 blessings recorded on the Sermon on the Mount. 8 days passed between Palm Sunday to Resurrection Sunday. That was the tradition. We speak about Christians. What's the connection to the Muslim building over there? Well, when the Muslims made this decision that Temple Mount will be holy to Islam, they had no idea what does it mean to be holy. What are we going to do? They looked around them. They saw a lot of churches in town. So the idea that we are going to build a building on top of Temple Mount to commemorate the place where Muhammad has ascended was basically copying the Christian way. Mosques were not built on places which are connected to Muhammad. So they simply asked a local Christian architect, there were no Muslim architects yet, say, listen, this is a holy place for us, build us a holy place. And the Christian holy place builds an 8-sided building. Here is an irony of history. The third holiest place to Islam was built by Christians in a Christian style. That's how the early churches used to look like. And when they're going to rebuild the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, it's identical almost by the inch. The only problem is, this one doesn't have any structures around. You can see the size and the shape of it. The church is in the very heart of the Christian quarter, surrounded by so many structures, you can't really see how the building looks like. So please take my word for it. It's an exact replica of the Dome of the Rock. So this was built to copy a Christian structure. The Christians copied that structure to build the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. All right? Understand? Interesting how history is working and how things are evolving. So Temple Mount is now not the dump of Jerusalem, but one of the two main centers for the Crusaders. We have some visitors that came to visit the city, and they give us a report. One of them was a Jewish traveler, a rabbi, so to speak, by the name of Benjamin, who came from Spain, from Tudela, 12th century, and he gives us a report about Jerusalem, the way the city looked like, and he was quite impressed by the massive structures, impressed by the fact that all the streets are paved with stone. Keep in mind, European cities were just mud. So this man gives us a report about how the city used to look like in the early part of the Crusaders' occupation, if you wish, and he gives us some information about the presence of Jewish families in the city. Interesting, the first Christian kingdom, Jews were not permitted in. The Muslims did take them in, and the Crusaders allowed them to stay because they were very industrious and they mastered occupations. For example, it was a profession that Jews had from generation to generation, how to dye fabric. If you want to have the royal color, the purple robe to symbolize you, you need to have a Jewish master, a Jewish artisan, because they knew how to do that. So you need them in town just to make sure that the Crusader royalty wears the garments and they do have the right color. So that was one reason why the Jews were permitted to stay in the city. I'm taking a sidetrack for just a minute. If you travel through Europe, you will not find too many structures made of stone that were built before the Crusades, unless they are there from the days of the Roman Empire. In Europe, there is a reason why we call the Middle Ages the Dark Ages. The continent simply forgot how to construct in stone. Everything was made of timber. Where did they learn that? In Jerusalem. Because once you occupy the place, everything is made of stone, including mangers, all right? Mangers are not made of timber. Everything is made of stone. So the Crusaders learned from the local Muslim stonemasons how to construct those massive buildings. They brought the knowledge back to Europe, and the Europeans elevated it to the Romanesque style and the Gothic style and the Rococo and all the others. It started in Jerusalem. The most ancient structures in Europe, which are made of stone that stand until this very day, were brought to Europe by the Crusaders that studied the art, if you wish, or the way to construct in stone from the Muslim stonemasons in Jerusalem. So the Crusaders were quite a blessing to European architecture, at least. That's where it started. So those travelers will give us a report about the city and the way that the city used to look like, and that's what gives us most of the information about Jerusalem in the Crusader days. The main structure the Crusaders built, and that was to celebrate the 50th anniversary to the conquest of Jerusalem, was the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Church of the Holy Sepulchre, not the first building standing there. The first one was built by Constantine, we mentioned that. Dedicated September 14, 335, this building stood. They even lasted the Muslim conquest. We spoke about the archbishop asking Omar to pray with him in the church, and Omar promises we are going to spare the building. Same building stood. 1009, there was a local riot in the area. The church was destroyed, which was the main reason for the Crusades. And when they came to town, they started rebuilding the new one to make it a magnificent building. It was dedicated to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the conquest of Jerusalem. That will be the 19th of July, right? 15th of July, 1149. We have records from European literature that all the who's and who's in the continent came to participate in the dedication of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. That's the building, stands until this very day. When you come to Jerusalem and you walk the way of the cross, we'll speak about it later on, it ends inside the building, which is called the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, or the Church of the Holy Grave. Basically, that's what it means. So that will be the main structure that was built by the Crusaders in Jerusalem. The most important structure that the Crusaders built in Jerusalem was the Church of the Holy Sepulchre that you see behind me. It wasn't the first time a church was standing here. The first two churches were built by Constantine the Great, 335. And these churches lasted the Muslim conquest of Jerusalem, destroyed 1009. And one of the main reasons to call for the Crusades was to redeem the Church of the Holy Tomb, or the Holy Sepulchre, And the Crusaders were those that came to the city as a result of that call and conquered it. The church was dedicated to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the conquest of Jerusalem by the Crusaders, and that was the 15th of July, 1149. The Queen of Jerusalem, Queen Melisande, was responsible for the celebrations, and Christian sources are telling us that all the dignitaries of Europe back at the time came to participate in that celebration. Inside the building today, there are two centers. One is marking the hill of Golgotha, which means skull hill or the place for the cross, and the other one is marking the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea. Many Christians do believe that this would be the holiest place on the planet for the crucifixion, the burial, and the resurrection. Now, some of you that have been to Jerusalem may be shocked to see that there are no people around. This is the busiest part of town. Always zillions of people waiting outside just to go inside. This one was taken in the second day of the war, October 9th. There was nobody in the city. I was able to visit a couple of times, even before Christmas Day, when the city is enjoying, the masses come to celebrate. Nobody, absolutely nobody. At least you can take advantage and do some filming when nobody is around you. Let me take you inside the building, and we'll climb together the stairs that go to the upper floor, climbing the hill of Golgotha, basically. It's under the building. So when you see the structure in front of you, inside the building, under one roof, you have on one side Calvary, basically, and on the other side, the tomb. The tomb, by the way, the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea, we spoke about it, should be outside the walls of Jerusalem. We'll speak in a few minutes about how the way of the cross was created, and then we'll speak about that as well. Let's go inside the building and start climbing the stairs up to the hill or Mount Calvary. It's a steep climb, all right? So if you want to stop and catch your breath, by all means. And the staircase will take us up to the very top, believed to be, of course, the place for the crucifixion. Everything is done Russian style by today. It was Crusader style. The big fire, 1808, consumed a big part of the building, and the Russians won the competition about donating money. Everything was redone Russian style. This will be the upper platform of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and that is marking the place of the cross. We'll speak about the station of the cross later on. Station 11 basically is here where Jesus is nailed to the cross, but the central part, and if you're a Catholic, Greek Orthodox, that will be the place to visit, will be right here. So the place of the crucifixion, standing right above the bedrock. They cleared that area a few years ago so people can see the very bedrock. Some people will crawl under the altar. There is a hole. You can stick your hand, actually touch the bedrock. That's how the upper part of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre looks like today. That will be station 13 of the cross. After Jesus dies on the cross, they take him down and they prepare for his burial in the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea. So that will be the site for the crucifixion. Again, a Greek Orthodox, Catholic, Armenian, one of the two possibilities about the location of Golgotha. You do remember, we did mention the Garden Tomb as another possibility. We'll visit the Garden Tomb later on. Speaking about much constructions, another building built by the Crusaders was the tomb of the Virgin Mary. It's confusing. The Bible gives us absolutely no information about the burial of the Virgin Mary. There are two places in Jerusalem that commemorate that, and one outside Ephesus in Turkey. All right, the Greek Orthodox bury Mary, so to speak, in Jerusalem, and in the Kidron Valley. This whole structure goes back to the Crusaders' days. Some of you that know architecture, this is style called Romanesque, all right? Invented in Jerusalem and used all over Europe today. But this is the origin of it. So the Greek Orthodox do believe that Mary died, and they bury her in this church. The Catholics believe that Mary fell asleep, and then she ascended. Catholic countries are celebrating the Assumption of Mary in August 15. It's a national celebration in France and Spain and Italy. So she fell asleep in a place, and there was a church in Jerusalem called the Dormition Abbey, marking that event. So the Catholics have a different idea. The Greek Orthodox have a different idea about Mary's position in Jerusalem for the last 1,000 years. That's where they mark the tomb of Mary, and you do see the crypt inside that stands in the bottom of the Kidron Valley. Another building that we know beyond any doubt to be authentic will be what we call the Church of St. Anne's that stands on the ruins of the Pool of Bethesda. Built 1140, I'll take you in just a minute. It's a tradition. The Bible doesn't mention that, but one of the books of the Apocrypha, which is called the Gospel of James, there is such a book, not included in your Bible, but the Catholic Bible does include the book of James as well. In the book of James, they suggest that Mary was born in Jerusalem. Even mentioned the name of her parents, Anna and Joachim. So they located a certain place by the Pool of Bethesda and claimed this is the birthplace of the Virgin Mary. And the big church was built. It's beautiful and stands until its very great condition. It is called the Church of St. Anne, named after Mary's mother, according to the book of James. It's a beautiful structure. Let me take you inside for just a minute. The acoustic, absolutely amazing. And some of you had a chance to sing in the church if you visited Jerusalem. I don't know who was your guide, but any decent guide will give the groups a chance to sing in the Church of the St. Anne, because the acoustics are absolutely amazing. The walls are totally naked. That's what makes the acoustics so great. And keep in mind, the first example of Romanesque style is not in Rome and not in Paris, not in Madrid, but here in Jerusalem. So this is the Church of St. Anne, marking the birthplace of the Virgin Mary. Would you like to enjoy the acoustics inside the church? Yes, no, maybe? Well, let's enjoy the acoustics. I need some volume. It is beautiful, huh? I had the pleasure to guide for Charlie Daniels, the country singer, many years ago, and to listen to him singing Amazing Grace with a broken voice, no fiddle, just the man himself. It was quite something. So everybody sounds like the best choir in the world when you sing in the Church of St. Anne. It's really a nice experience. The last Crusader structure that I would like to take you to is what we call the upper room. Well, it's a traditional location, one has to say, because we do not know exactly where the Last Supper took place. And the tradition is that 50 days later, when the Bible speaks about the day of Pentecost, it says that they were in a place. Idea is that the place of the Last Supper became to be a meeting point for the local Judeo-Christian community, and therefore the Christian world is celebrating two major events in one structure: the Last Supper, the Passover meal basically, and Pentecost Day. It was closed with no tourism. They don't open it, so I could only go outside. Let me share that with you very briefly. We left the city walls heading south, and we are standing outside the upper room. It's a traditional location, but two major events took place in this area. Number one, the Last Supper, and 50 days later, that's when the day of Pentecost had occurred as well. The structure is from the 13th century, that means Crusader. The Crusaders, master builders, left quite a lot behind in the city. We visited the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. We mentioned the Church of St. Anne's by the Pool of Bethesda, and the upper room is another one. This place was under a lot of controversy. We cannot visit inside, but it used to be a Muslim place. It used to be a Christian place. Jews are marking David's tomb one floor lower, a traditional location as well. It's not in Christian hands today, officially maintained by the state. But the structure is Crusader, and inside you see some manifestations of Christianity, obviously, although for the last 500 years or so, it doesn't belong to any religion. It is officially maintained by state authorities. I did mention that down below is the tomb of David. Think about it, in one place, right? One place, the Jews were celebrating David's tomb down below. One floor above is the Christian side, basically, which is officially maintained by the state. But if you go inside, which we cannot right now, you will see on the walls a lot of signs, symbols, which indicate a Muslim location as well. This structure looks more like a mosque today than a church. It depends who had the upper hand in the city, and property was changing hands for the highest bidder, and sometimes to use that as a tool to gain political advantages. Religion was always a tool by Christian superpowers to try to get more influence in the Ottoman territory. We'll get to that a little later on. So speaking about the Crusader town, that was the tour that I chose to take you through. When you come to visit Jerusalem, you can clearly see how walls are standing one above the other. This is a section of the Crusader wall of Jerusalem that was built by the Crusaders, and right above that, the 16th century wall was built by the Ottomans. So cities are built in layers, one above the other, and guess what? If you go deep enough, you'll find a section of the wall from the days of King Hezekiah, the first builder of the wall that included this part of town. Walls are standing one above the other, but every new wall will be built about 10 or 20 feet further in to add more stability. This is not very stable. If you want to add the heavy weight of another wall and build it right here, it will not hold on that well. So every additional wall will be built a little further. The top is shrinking constantly, all right? So the city from the days of Hezekiah was a little bigger than the city of today, just because the walls are built one above the other and a little further in. So that brings us basically to the end almost of the Crusader story, although I do want to point at the area of Jaffa Gate. This is called David's Tower, that was built in the Crusaders' days in the citadel, and that became to be the palace of the king of the Crusaders, and that was the seat of power and the throne. For the short 88 years that the Crusaders existed, that will be the stronghold of the Crusader presence in Jerusalem. Years go by, and the Muslim world is recovering for the shock that they have experienced as a result of the Crusades, and a man by the name of Saladin comes to power. Saladin, who is a great Arab hero, everybody mentions him, the man was not an Arab, he was a Kurd. I know it sounds like nuances which are not important, they are very important. The Kurds are Muslims, but they're not Arabs. And therefore, Saddam Hussein was called the Saladin of the 20th century, for example. So the Muslim world is bragging, and the Arabs, and they use Saladin as a role model, because he was the one that conquered the Crusader kingdom and basically defeated the Crusader kingdom and brought the Christian presence in Jerusalem to an end until the next time Christian soldiers will march through the gates of Jerusalem will be General Allenby in the 9th of December 1917. So for quite a few centuries, Christians had presence in Jerusalem as pilgrims, but not as the ruling power. The Crusaders lost the city October 2nd, 1187. And since they did, another crusade was getting together to try to reconquer Jerusalem, and another one, until we get to the Sixth Crusade, led by a mighty king in Europe by the name of Frederick II Hohenstaufen. The name is not important. And he leads an army, a massive one, because he promised the Pope, Innocent III, that he's going to reconquer Jerusalem for the Christian world. Problem was, he did not have enough forces. He was stopped by the Muslims in the area of Jaffa, but they made an agreement. Agreement was that you can have Jerusalem, but only Jerusalem and a narrow corridor that will connect the harbor of Jaffa. It didn't last for too long, but for 15 years, Jerusalem would be once again in the hands of Christians, and then it simply changed hands, and Christianity was basically thrown out of the country, if I may say so. And the next time that the Christian army is marching through Israel is Napoleon. But the next time that Jerusalem is conquered by Christian foes, that will be the British Army in the 9th of December 1917. Making progress, and I do want to take you to another fascinating era in Jerusalem, and that will be the era of the Mamluks. I won't speak much about them, except for one thing which is relevant, because we do not have that much time to go into details, so we only speak about the Mamluks in one regard. Number one, the term Mamluk. We speak about late Islam, as we call this one, early Islam and late Islam. One thing about the Mamluks, quite a story. We speak about rulers of Egypt that were basically children that were kidnapped by the Egyptian troops from the mountains of the Caucasus, Christian kids. They took them to Egypt, converted them to Islam, and trained them to be warriors for Islam. We speak about a class in the society. Mamluk means a slave king. I know it sounds an oxymoron. How can a slave be a king? But that was, if you wish, the beauty of the system. You were handpicked by professional soldiers. You were trained to be a warrior and trained to be the next sultan. You were not permitted to marry. You were not permitted to have any possessions. You were not connected politically to anybody. You were dedicated to do one thing, fight for Islam. And once you died, all of your possessions were given back to the kingdom. Since you did not have any children to replace you, it would avoid a lot of problems and civil wars. When a Mamluk died, all the others got together and they would simply choose who is the most gifted one to be the next Mamluk. Quite an interesting time in the system. It was working quite well for nearly 300 years. So the Mamluk era is the one that brought Jerusalem to another climax. Because if you know that when you're gone, your possessions are going back to the kingdom and you want to spend that money somehow, you're so thankful for the Muslim world to make you king. You're going to invest in Jerusalem to build madrasas, which is a Muslim school, and to build mosques. Jerusalem enjoyed the Mamluk era because much money was given by the Mamluks to glorify their name. Temple Mount has today more than 100 structures right on top. Most of them were built by those Mamluks. Each one had an idea how to make it more beautiful. You see fountains, and you see pulpits, and you see staircases leading nowhere, just to glorify one of these Mamluks. So Jerusalem was enriched by that, a very small era, but relevant to our story. Some examples of Mamluk architecture. You see the color. This is 14th century. So the city today is very much from the 14th century, and that's how some of these structures look like, marketplaces. Jerusalem was blessed by the whole era of the Mamluks, but it's more relevant to our session here to speak about the way that the way of the cross was basically created, and give me a minute to try to explain that. I did tell you earlier that Christians were welcome in Jerusalem because Christians brought money with them. And after the last Crusader was expelled from the country, 1291, the tension was so high between Muslims and Christians that the last thing that the local Muslims wanted to see are Christians roaming the streets of Jerusalem once again. But the authorities needed the money. For 50 years, no Christians came to Jerusalem. It was strictly forbidden. But then the Pope once again tried to initiate some negotiations in order to restore and resume Christian presence in Jerusalem. They sent a delegation to the Sultan in Cairo, and that delegation represented a king in Spain that refused to participate in the Crusades. Some European powers did not participate in the Crusades. So they were the mediators to try to reconcile between the Christian world and the Muslim one. A deal was struck. Money changed hands. And this time the deal was that you Christians can come back to the city. But since we cannot control the mob that will be very upset, you're going to choose one path that you want to walk along, and that will be one mandatory path. The way of the cross, the Via Dolorosa, is the road that Jesus took with the cross from the place of the trial to Mount Calvary. When you read Christian stories before the 14th century, nobody speaks about a mandatory path to follow. the way of the cross. People came randomly. They had a list of places to visit. Each site offered indulgences. Nobody was sticking to one main road. Now it began to be a necessity, because the idea was, if you want to visit Jerusalem and we do not control the mob, we cannot guarantee your safety, you choose one path, just one. And as long as you stay on this path, we can guarantee your safety. The way of the cross was born. And therefore the path that goes from the place of the trial, Praetorium, all the way to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, within the walls now, outside the walls back then, some of you should recall, was created basically by the Mamluks when they made that deal with the Christian world. In order to invite the Christians back to the city, the Christians, pilgrims, brought money with them, and that's why it was so attractive. So a deal was made. They paid about 300,000 ducats. That was the currency in Italy. That was also the currency of the Pope's area, obviously. And that was now not just a gesture that was made by the Muslims. It was an international agreement, and the Muslim world is now committed to give that liberty to Christians to come to visit the city. But you're limited to one path. Now, we cannot absolutely rule over or say that this is not the way of the cross. It's possible that this is indeed the path that Jesus walked. But lo and behold, this path was designed because of another reason. The Pope, Clement VI, and the papacy was in exile back at the time. Some of you know church history. For 88 years, the Pope was basically residing in Avignon in France. Because of local issues, there was a rebellion against the Pope in Rome. He had to relocate, and for 88 years, they called it the exile like Babylon. The exile of the papacy. Clement VI was the one that asked to his office the head of the Franciscans, Father Order, and gave him a mission. You, sir, he said, are going to be the custodian of the Holy Land. I'm going to send you over to Jerusalem, and you have a mission. You're going to host all those Christian pilgrims. You will be responsible for the good behavior. You represent the Christian world to the Muslims. And if something happens, you will be punished. It gave the Franciscans a lot of power, a lot of influence, and they tried to purchase as many positions as possible. And therefore, that path, and I'm not being cynical, is very interestingly connecting the Franciscan inn, the Franciscan restaurant, the Franciscan souvenir shop, and the Franciscan hospice. I'm saying once again, we cannot say beyond any doubt that this was not the way of the cross. Maybe that was indeed the path. But the fact that you're limited to one path, and interestingly enough, you're going from one Franciscan side to the other, that's what created what we call the Via Dolorosa. Every Catholic church in the world, all of them, will have the stations of the cross marked on the walls of the church. So people don't have to come all the way to Jerusalem. They can reenact this whole path in their own churches. But it was invented, so to speak, by the Franciscans in Jerusalem. So the way of the cross was born in the 1400s, and today many people that come to town will follow the way of the cross or the way of suffering, the Via Dolorosa. And you see the street signs which are marking the Via Dolorosa on your way. That's how this road was born. I do want to take you back now to the days of Jesus, basically. And here is the map of Jerusalem from that era, and I do want to elaborate just a little bit with your permission. What I showed you a minute ago is basically the way of the cross of today. But that means if you believe that this is indeed the place of the crucifixion. And what if you point at the garden tomb area? Then the way of the cross should take you basically to the garden tomb. So how many ways of the cross are there? You don't understand. It all depends on what you believe in. If you believe that the crucifixion took place here, and that's Mount Golgotha, that will be the way of the cross for you. If you believe that this is where the Church of the Holy Sepulchre was, that will be your Via Dolorosa. And to add to the confusion, why keep it simple? You can make it more complicated. There was another theory about the way of the cross. Some scholars do believe that when Pontius Pilate came to town, he did not position himself in the fortress over here, but he positioned himself in the palace of King Herod the Great. He was a spoiled individual. He wanted to enjoy the luxury of the palace, And for that reason, he would not go to the barracks of the soldiers because he wanted to enjoy the palace of luxury. Possible. But the main reason for him to come to Jerusalem was to watch carefully what happens on top of Temple Mount. That will be the hot spot. You control Temple Mount from here, not from here. If there are riots in the city, the roads are so narrow, they're very easy to barricade. Which means if you position yourself here, you defeat your own purpose. You can't even get closer to Temple Mount if something happens in the city. But some scholars do believe that that was the place of the trial of Jesus, which means that will be the way of the cross for those that believe that that's where the trial took place. You do understand the confusion here. Where exactly was Praetorium, and what exactly was the path that Jesus took on his way from the place of the trial to his crucifixion? And that will complete this whole complicated issue about the crucifixion and about where was the cross standing, etc. All that happened in the days of the Mamluks, and that will bring us to the last era before we speak about Jerusalem as a Jewish capital in the state of Israel, and that will be the Ottoman period. I would like to stop now with your permission, ask you to be back in 15 minutes to bring the whole seminar to conclusion. We'll speak about the Ottoman era, we'll speak about the turning point that brought Jerusalem into the modern era, and then we'll speak about the British Mandate, the fight for Jerusalem in 1948, Jerusalem as a divided city, and most important, at least for me, Jerusalem as a united city, as capital, never to be divided again. So I'm watching the clock. We'll start on time. Please be back in 15 minutes. Thank you. Okay, folks. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, please come and take your places. This session will be the grand finale, so to speak, of the whole seminar about Jerusalem. I would like to bring it to conclusion by 8:30 and give you a chance to ask questions about what we shared over the last 3 nights. So if you had a question about things that I shared with you and you would like to know the answer, think about that and we'll try to make it work. My one request is that you raise your voice when you're asking questions. I'm an old man and I won't be able to hear you unless you literally scream. But I can tell because people approach me in the breaks and ask questions that maybe many of you will be interested to have the answer. So if you thought about something that you would like to know about Jerusalem, and I did not cover everything. As we said, selected the chapters. This is indeed selected the chapters. There was a king in Jerusalem for 3 years that was a descendant of Genghis Khan. Did you know that? 1299 to 1302. So it's just not important enough to make a whole session out of it. So we speak about selected chapters. We focus on what was really important in the city's history. We left Jerusalem that was in the hands of the Mamluks, and we start the last session that will take us through about 150 years or so, well, more than that, from the era of the Ottomans. When you speak about the Ottomans, you speak about a tribe that was originated in the heights of Asia, the area of Kazakhstan of today, that gradually was able to found one of the largest empires ever. They conquered Constantinople from the Christians, that was 1453, and gradually enlarged their territory. In 1517, after engaging with the Mamluks and defeating them outside the pyramids just by Cairo, they will be the new masters of Palestine for 400 years. And the Ottoman era is going also to mark the turning point in Jerusalem's history. You need to understand, which is really interesting, that until about 1857-58, Jerusalem was an area that simply did not enjoy any of the modern era. The first water pump that was brought to Palestine was in the middle of the 19th century. The world was making gigantic steps toward progress. The modern era was everywhere, not in the Ottoman territory. It's quite interesting, but the mindset was, if we Muslims are superior to all the others, what can we learn from Christians which are inferior? They missed the Industrial Revolution. They were not part of acquiring colonies around the world. They did not have ambassadors in any European country, because what can the Christians tell us or teach us? Absolutely nothing. We are superior. If anybody still likes to read books today, I can recommend one that was authored by an American, British, and Jewish historian called Bernard Lewis. And this book is called What Went Wrong. He was an expert and authority on Islam, and he tries to answer the question, how come the Ottoman Empire that literally led the world for a long time woke up one day to realize they're way behind? They simply missed the modern era. And Palestine was part of that approach. Palestine did not enjoy any of the progress that was made in Europe and other parts of the world. The Ottomans were not interested to learn anything from outside Ottoman territory, and by the time they woke up to understand we are way behind Europe, it was a little too late. Only when Napoleon invaded their territory and with 1,300 professional soldiers was able to defeat the Ottoman army time after time after time, that was a wake-up call. They were still fighting on horses without having any modern rifles or gunpowder, and they had to face the armies of Napoleon, as you understand. They did not stand a chance. In much haste, they tried to catch up. In much haste, they understood, just a minute now, we need to catch up because we are way behind. How humiliating. Who is going to teach the Ottoman army how to lead or how to go to modern warfare, modern 19th century? Christian instructors, how humiliating. So the Ottomans were quite a strange story, if you wish, in the region's history, and Jerusalem was part of the Ottoman territory. Palestine was a province in the Ottoman Empire, and it took a long time for the Ottomans to understand that they're way behind. and that will lead to great involvement of European Christian superpowers in Ottoman territory. We'll get to that because that will change everything in the region, including Jerusalem. Until then, Jerusalem was a small town, only within the walls of the old city. Nobody dared to live outside because it wasn't safe. The Ottomans had no interest to send the troops to police the area, and therefore Jerusalem did not enjoy any prosperity. It was way behind like the rest of the Ottoman Empire. Something had to happen to change all of that, and we'll speak about that in about half an hour. So the Ottomans now conquering Palestine and Jerusalem. Muslims, obviously, they pay some attention to Jerusalem, but not much. The first thing they do under a sultan by the name of Suleiman the Magnificent, although in Islam he is known as Suleiman the Lawgiver, El-Kanuni, the Magnificent was a title given to him by the Europeans. He will be the builder of the walls of Jerusalem as we know them until this very day. For 300 years, Jerusalem was a city without defenses. We spoke about the Mamluks. Since the Mamluks were so few in number, and they knew that Jerusalem may become a target for the Christian world once again, they decided, as part of their strategy, that Jerusalem will have no walls around. And if you wonder what is the logic, well, the logic was, we may not be able to protect the city. Somebody may take it from us, but since the city doesn't have walls, it will be easier for us to reconquer that if Jerusalem doesn't have any walls. That was the logic. For 300 years, the city has no walls. The Ottomans, the first thing that he does, Suleiman the Magnificent, is to build a wall around Jerusalem. The reason was that one of the mighty kings of Europe of that era, Karl V, the king of Spain and the king of Germany, don't ask me how he got that title, well, through marriages, obviously, promised the Pope once again he's going to lead a crusade to Palestine. If you lead a crusade to Palestine, we speak about the 16th century, and Jerusalem is your target, you have to protect the city. And that was the reason why the Sultan, in 4 years, rebuilt the walls of Jerusalem, and these are the walls of the city until this very day. It covers about 2.5 miles in circumference. It's not a large area, about 0.6 square miles. It has 7 gates in the old city walls. And since the king of Europe died and the crusade was off the table, the project never came to completion. I will show you on the walls of Jerusalem places that were not completed by the Ottomans because now there was no danger, there was no need to dedicate any resources to complete the work of the walls around Jerusalem. The city numbered about 25,000 people back at the time, divided to 4 quarters that we have until this very day. If you look at the map of Jerusalem, and that's how the city looks until this very day, there are 2 main roads that are there from the Roman era. That will be the Cardo, the cardiology, the heart of the city, and that will be the crossroad, the Decumanus, that goes to the western wall of the Temple Mount, and then adds another section here, and there are 4 quarters. This will be the Muslim quarter of Jerusalem. This will be the Christian quarter around the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. This is the Armenian quarter, and this will be the Jewish quarter. Temple Mount is the 5th quarter, like a city within the city. Until this very day, the Muslim quarter is the largest one, but the population that numbers about 25,000 people gradually will have a Jewish majority. Keep in mind that although Jews were not permitted sometimes to come to the city, the attempt, the yearning, and the longing and missing Jerusalem was always there. 3 times a day, every Jewish man says when he prays, next year in Jerusalem. It was indeed wishful thinking for a long time, but every now and then opportunity presented itself, and the Jewish people will take the opportunity. There was always a Jewish presence in Jerusalem, except for the Byzantine era. And by then, the Jews made the majority in Jerusalem. So the structure that you see of the 4 quarters, it still exists today, although the demographics have changed over the years. I do want to point at the main road right here, the Cardo, which is basically the heart of the city, and that will be the crossroad. So the Jewish quarter is covering this area, the Armenian, Christian, and Muslim. Christian and Muslim, in both cases, Arab. I have to make that distinction because most people are totally confused. When you call somebody an Arab, you do not indicate a religion, you do not indicate a nationality, and not an ethnicity. The only way to define an Arab, it's a culture, it's a civilization, it's a language, it's a mindset. So under that capacity, you can be a Christian Arab, you can be a Muslim Arab, and you can be a Jewish Arab as well. Jews that lived in Arab countries are part of the Arab culture. They speak Arabic, they cook Arabic food, they write and read in Arabic. Today, when you say an Arab Jew, that will be offensive because of politics over the last century or so. But Jews that come from Morocco and Algeria and Tunisia are theoretically Arab Jews. So the term Arab is not indicating your nationality and not your religion. It's a language, it's a culture. In the case of Jerusalem, both quarters, Muslim and Christian, are Arabs. Arabs that practice Christianity or practice Islam, both Arabs. The Armenian quarter, which is over here, is the smallest one, and the Armenians are the most ancient Christian nation. The Armenians accepted Christianity before the days of Constantine. 301, the Armenian kingdom officially converted to Christianity. Armenians are the first Christian nation in the world, and they have possessions in Jerusalem ever since. So there is an Armenian presence in this part of town. The Armenian story and the Jewish one are somewhat similar. That's how the city looks like until this very day. We speak about 7 gates in the old city walls. Let's name them. Jaffa Gate will be the main one. Gates were named in most cases after the destination of the road that ran through that gate. So the road that went down to Jaffa will come out from Jaffa Gate. The road that went to Damascus will come out from Damascus Gate. What we call Zion Gate was also called the Hebron Gate because the road went down to Hebron, etc., etc. So 7 gates are there. Herod's Gate, which is over here, Damascus Gate, the New Gate, Jaffa Gate, Zion Gate, and the Dung Gate. Yes, the Dung Gate. And Lion's Gate will be number 7. There was another one, which is called the Eastern Gate, the Golden Gate, which will be opened when Messiah is coming. It's a sealed gate, and the Bible tells us in Ezekiel 44 that the glory of God departed from the temple in Jerusalem, and we believe through the gate that was once upon a time on the same location. So these are the gates in the walls of Jerusalem until this very day. That's how the city looks like. Until 1857, there was a single building outside the walls that was indeed Jerusalem. I can show you and I can demonstrate, and I will, how the project did not come to completion, because by every gate there was a plaque of dedication that has an inscription on it. In the year this and this and this gate was dedicated by the Sultan, etc. We have 8 plaques on the walls of Jerusalem with no writing on them, which means the job was not completed. Once rumor came to town that Karl is dead, there was no reason to dedicate the resources to complete the walls of Jerusalem. Some of these plaques are just leveled without any inscription on them, as others do have the inscription marking the date that the gate was built. By the way, year 0 in the Muslim calendar is 622. The Muslim year, all right, starts at 622, which is marking the departure of Muhammad from Mecca to Medina. So 622 is year 1 in the Muslim calendar. All right, so we can do the math, of course, to understand what years we're talking about, because the Muslims are using their calendar. So whenever you need to convert, all right, and find out, when you speak about the Muslim calendar, 622 is year 1 in the Muslim year, all right, the Muslim calendar. Let's have a word about the walls of Jerusalem. In the year 1219, the Ayyubides, rulers of Jerusalem, decided to dismantle the walls and use the stones to build their structures in the city. And for 300 years, Jerusalem was a town with no defenses. The Ottomans conquered the city at 1517, and the Sultan, Suleiman the Magnificent, better known for the Muslims as Suleiman the Lawgiver el-Kanuni, decided to refortify the city. The reason was another crusade was coming from Europe. It was in the days of King Karl, the Emperor of Germany and of Spain, that promised the Pope to lead another crusade to the Holy Land, and that was the main reason why the Ottoman Empire was willing to dedicate that many resources to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. The emperor died and the crusade never materialized, but the walls were built and not completely completed. They started in 1537, and the wall was completed at 1542. But once they heard that the crusade is not going to come after the death of King Karl, the wall was not totally completed. In many places they prepared plaques to write some dedications on them that were never really written. So this wall is from the 16th century. The circumference about 2.5 miles. 7 gates were built in this wall, and the city is standing on top of more ancient cities as well as the wall as well. So these are the walls of Jerusalem until this very day. Let me show you how Jaffa Gate looks like. And this is one of the main gates in the old city walls. And you see the dedication, right? This one is shown over here that speaks about the year of construction and gives credit to Suleiman the Magnificent. Let me show you the eastern gate, the one which is basically closed and sealed. The 4 plaques were prepared especially for writing some kind of a dedication. When this will be completed, nothing is written over there. So that's part of our indication to point to the fact that the project was not completed with the death of King Karl, or Charles, if you wish, Charles V, one of the mighty kings of Europe. We speak about the fortifications of Jerusalem from the 16th century. Let me say a word about those slits over here and here. If I'd ask you what's the idea behind those and you see them all around the walls, you'll give me a wrong answer. Your answer will be to shoot arrows through, right? Well, you're wrong, all right? Those slits are so narrow, you cannot shoot an arrow through. Maybe if you're Legolas, some of you know what I'm talking about, if you watch The Lord of the Rings. Good movies, huh? Anyhow, these were not to shoot arrows through. That was to pour boiled oil on the heads of the enemy that was gathering at the foot of the wall right here. So you come from the inside and you hear those jars with tar or oil, and you simply pour it over the heads of the enemy. They used to call those slits loopholes. That's where the term loophole is coming from. The world of military fortifications and not the world of lawyers and courthouses, etc. That's what a loophole is all about, part of the way to protect the city. You can walk around the walls of Jerusalem today and you see some black stuff under those slits, and you know the city was assaulted, and that's how the defenders protected this part of the wall, by pouring the boiled oil from the inside. That's the meaning of those over there. Since I did mention that the Ottoman era was also the turning point, let me speak about the way that Christian matters were resolved in Jerusalem by the Ottomans. Here is a strange situation for you. The Ottomans are the masters. Christians are coming to the city willing to invest, and that will of the Christian powers to be engaged in Jerusalem was fully exploited, even cynically, by the Ottoman authorities. They did understand that people will pay money to have more possessions in the city. And every group in the Christian world had a powerful patron that was supporting it. Russia was always behind the Greek Orthodox, France and Spain and Italy behind the Catholics, Britain behind the Anglicans, and whenever there was a problem politically between those superpowers, it also reflected on Jerusalem. And these countries had representatives in Jerusalem, just like the Crusaders were a miniature of Europe, so is Jerusalem in the 19th century. More countries want to have more influence, and they're using religion quite cynically to accomplish political gain. Now, the Sultan understood that he has a great advantage. It's a way to instigate those countries one against the other, because you have the right to sell property and then confiscate it, offer it to somebody else. If you played that game between the Russians and the French and the British, you do understand that you have the power to do that, and the Sultan totally used that power, using religion to gain more political power in Jerusalem. Things were so bad that a lot of bloodshed took place, and the Ottoman game had to come to an end because Christians were willing to pay the money and people were killed over fighting for these places. One example, if I may, One of the main reasons for the Crimean War, the biggest war of the 19th century, bigger than the wars of Napoleon, all right? Crimea was always a stumbling stone for Russia, and there was a reason why Putin confiscated the place of the Ukrainians. Crimea has the largest harbor in the Black Sea, and if you want to go down to the Mediterranean and get closer to the European powers, you have to have a harbor that will be in the Crimean Peninsula. That's the reason why Crimea takes that much attention even today as we speak. You do know that 1214, Russia simply conquered Crimea from the Ukrainians. They still have it today. It's not a new thing. That was always the desire of Russia, to go down to hot water harbors. Russia is the rising power. The problem is that most of the harbors are freezing in the wintertime. Russia cannot use its naval power unless you use the Black Sea, the only one that doesn't freeze, and go through the Bosphorus Straits down to Europe, basically. The Black Sea became to be the battlefield, if you wish, and Turkey is holding the front line with Russia. So Turkey was fighting in behalf of all of Europe to try to stop the expansion of the Russians. Some things never change. The only reason why the Russians today are engaged in Syria with military bases, because Russia needs to have hot water harbors, otherwise the Navy is out of use 8 months out of the year, because the other harbors are simply freezing. All right, so few things don't really change. So we speak about the political game, if you wish. Who will have more control? Who will have more power? Jerusalem is about to enjoy that because everybody wants to invest money and to have more possessions in the city. The Crimean War started, among other reasons, because of a religious issue that took place in Bethlehem. Bethlehem has a church called the Church of the Nativity, believed to be the place where Jesus was born. And it was divided between the Catholics and the Greek Orthodox and the Armenians. Every group had a part of the building and had the chandeliers and the small altars. And one was responsible to go down to the grotto, a Catholic one, and to shine the Star of Bethlehem, which is marking the birthplace of Jesus. A silver star, 14 points. One day in 1547, the priest that was responsible goes downstairs into the grotto, and lo and behold, the star was gone. Somebody stole the star. What would you do? Well, if you're a Catholic, it's almost like an instinct. You're going to accuse the Greek Orthodox. And since France was the patron of Catholicism and Russia of the Greek Orthodox, guess what happened? In a very short time, it became to be an international issue. Both countries demanded that Turkey is responsible. You find the star and bring it back. And before not too long, all hell broke loose, and the world got engaged in a war that will be called the Crimean War. So this is just an example how Jerusalem and the holy sites in Bethlehem, for example, affected European affairs in the 19th century. So the Ottomans very cleverly played their cards. It's almost like divide and conquer. We don't want the Christian world to be united. One way to instigate those countries once again the other is to play that game of giving the rights in a building, in a church, confiscate it, offer it to somebody else. And why offer a building? We can offer one window. We can offer a door in a building. We can offer a chandelier. We'll make more money. You want to kindle that chandelier tomorrow? 50,000 ducats a year. And the countries in Europe paid, because they wanted to have more presence and more possessions. It will give them political power. Things were so bad that something had to be done, and that something will be called the status quo. The status quo basically will say the following. We're going to freeze the situation to the year 1759. We're going to make an inventory of who owns what in the city, and that's going to be like cementing a deal that nobody can change. Everything is going to be done by the status quo. It worked for a while, but not for too long, because the sultans wanted more money. We speak about bloodshed. We speak about violence. Even today, Jerusalem can be a very unpleasant place because Christian groups still fight for the places. Today, nobody's getting killed, but the tension is still there. 15 years ago was a fist fight in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. The only time the police was invited in was to stop that fight. And what was the problem? A violation of the status quo. So this status quo was basically agreed upon. Finally, in 1878, the Conference of Berlin, everything is done by the status quo, which means that every group in Jerusalem knows which wall is theirs, how many stairs they can clean, what time of the day, where the procession is going to enter to the church, how long they can stay in the grotto, and if you break one of these rules, there's a lot of problems in town. Everything in the city, even today, is done by the status quo. And that leads to some absurds. Outside the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, leaning against the window over there, there is a ladder. A simple, stupid, wooden ladder. When they made an inventory of who owns what for the status quo, somebody forgot to include the ladder, which means the ladder is not part of the status quo. You cannot touch it, you cannot move it, you cannot do anything with it, because if you dare to, it's a violation of the status quo. It sounds ridiculous, I'll be quick to agree, but at least the conflict is a little more civilized today than it used to be. But the Ottomans were those that created the status quo in order to try to control who has what, and that was working quite well, I have to say, for the Ottomans, at least for a while. So we do see how the Christian involvement is getting bigger and bigger, and Europe is definitely engaged in Ottoman affairs in Jerusalem, which will lead us to what I would call the turning point. If I am to point at the two main reasons that brought the modern era to Palestine, Jerusalem included, I will mention two main events. Number one will be the opening of the Suez Canal. Suez Canal was opened in 1869. It's a water artery that connects the Mediterranean Sea and the Indian Ocean, which means that for the European superpowers to trade with China or with India, instead of going around the whole continent of Africa, if you take the canal, you cut the journey 4,000 miles shorter, which means that once the canal was open, everybody wants to own the canal. And usually, Great Britain won. They paid the money, they had the resources, they bought the shares of the canal in 1872. The British Army was sent in to protect the investments, and now we have British troops deployed on Ottoman soil. Egypt, Suez Canal was an Ottoman province. Now, if you are a British general and you want to protect the canal, you don't protect it by positioning your forces on the canal. You need some strategic depth. So if you know the map, you have the Suez Canal, and then you have the whole Sinai Peninsula, and then there's Palestine/Israel, which means to protect the canal effectively from any potential enemy, you want to use Israel's territory as the gatekeeper for the Suez Canal. And suddenly a country that did not have any strategic meaning for a long time is once again to the table because Great Britain needs to protect the canal, and Palestine will be the first line of defense. Suddenly Palestine is an important place once again. And if Britain is interested in anything, so will be the French and the Russians and the Germans and the Austro-Hungarians in a very short time. Everybody wants to control Palestine because they want to present a threat for Britain protecting the Suez Canal. I know it sounds crazy, but that's what brought Palestine back to the world's attention. But you can't really say that. I'm not going to be engaged in Palestine because of Great Britain or politics. I'm interested in religion. So let me satisfy my religious needs by purchasing property. And if I have property that I've invested in, I need to protect it. I'm going to send some diplomats also. I'm going to send delegations, and gradually you're going to increase your influence. It all started as a result of the Suez Canal that brought Palestine to the attention of Europe, and if you wish, into the modern era. Because if you want to deploy your forces along the canal or in Palestine, you also demand the Turks, listen, you need to provide security for the people, you need to provide better conditions to the people in Jerusalem, and now the Christian powers are coming, and they will not live in the poor conditions that Jerusalem had to offer under the Ottomans. So the city begins to grow. The first neighborhoods are moving outside the city walls. There is an American colony, and there is a British colony, and there is a Russian colony. Walking the streets of Jerusalem even today is seeing those communities still there. Russian style and French style and German style and Scottish style, everybody comes to town. But the trigger was indeed the Suez Canal. At the same time, the Ottoman Empire was in a terrible financial condition. They needed money. And the question is, who will invest in an empire that is about to collapse? And what will be the motivation to invest? You know the answer, religion. Now you see that by the law of Islam, land which is owned by Muslims is not to be sold to anybody. It's haram. If you sell Muslim territory to non-Muslim, you are facing death penalty by Sharia law, by the law of Islam. And this is not ancient law we speak about today. If a Muslim sells his land to non-Muslim here in America today, by Sharia law, you're facing a death penalty. Because Muslim property needs to stay, must stay in Muslim hands. But the Sultan had a problem. The problem was he needed money. So he made a compromise. I'm going to offer land in Palestine for anybody who is interested and who will be potential buyers, Christian countries that wanted to increase their influence in Israel. Because of the Suez Canal, Israel is once again a strategic asset, but you can't say that. But what you can say is, I'm interested in religion. I'm going to invest in religious holy places. What you really mean is, I'm going to increase my political influence in Ottoman territory because everybody knew the Ottoman Empire is about to collapse. And everybody wanted pieces from the Ottoman Empire, keeping in mind the asset called the Suez Canal. So Jerusalem is going to enjoy a whole new era, but once you come to the city, it's quite amazing. Nothing was standing outside the walls until 1857. 1857, the first building was built outside the walls of Jerusalem. Today, by the way, what we call the Old City is covering 1% from the full size of Jerusalem. The city today is 100 times bigger than the walls of the Old City. So we did cover some of it, and let's back it up with a short video. We'll hear that information twice. Until the middle of the 19th century, nothing was built outside the walls of Jerusalem. The Ottoman Empire showed little interest in what happened in the city. The middle of the 19th century will be the turning point. The Ottoman Empire became weaker and weaker. They needed more investments. European countries, all Christian, are more than happy to invest, and through those investments to intensify their intervention in Ottoman affairs, political as well. So the Christian world basically was coming back to restore their presence in Jerusalem by using the religious factor to gain more political influence. And since the city was crowded, there was no room inside to facilitate any of the modern structures. They had to leave the safety of the walls. The Ottomans had to guarantee some safety in the area and prepare the infrastructure, and one country after the other moved over its consulate and its embassies and all facilities to accommodate pilgrims who came from these countries. That was the turning point that led Jerusalem to the modern era, basically. The neighborhood that you see behind me, across the Hinnom Valley, was the first one that was built outside the walls by Jewish money. Money that was sent from an American businessman by the name of Judah Turo was used $50,000 to buy a piece of property, and the first neighborhood the Jews built was built outside the walls of the city, right across from the Kidron Valley. That was the beginning to what it is today. Today, the city of Jerusalem is 100 times bigger in size than the old city of Jerusalem. Jerusalem today covers an area of more than 30,000 acres. The beginning of it was in the middle of the 19th century to what it is today. So that will be the beginning of a totally new chapter in the city's history. And Jerusalem today is the biggest Jerusalem that ever existed, but the beginning was very modest, so to speak. Just to mark some turning points, I did mention some of it. The first neighborhood outside the walls built by the Jews, you see the windmill over there. that was brought from Leeds in England. It wasn't built on the very top of the hill, so it never really operated. There was simply not enough wind. All right, where this place was built, now it's a little monument and museum over there. You also see the carriage, if you wish, of a British, Jewish, very rich man by the name of Moses Montefiore. This man made the big donation to purchase land outside the walls. He was backed by Queen Victoria, the Queen of England. By the way, he was the only gentleman that was permitted to add to his coat of arms a word which was not English, and that was Jerusalem in Hebrew. All right, so that will be his original carriage, and you can't see the coat of arms, but it's someplace around here. So Montefiore was also representing the British government in his purchase of these places. And one after the other, new structures are being built outside. The city totally changes its nature, and the focus is moving from the old city of Jerusalem to the new one. And most of the new neighborhoods were built basically along the main road that goes down to the Mediterranean Sea through Jaffa Gate, which is the main road in Jerusalem until this very day. So the road that went to Jaffa was also the place where the new neighborhoods were built. There was a huge Russian compound in Jerusalem that was built by the Russian Tsar, and then we have the British and the French ones. Jerusalem is going to totally change, and something else happened which is related to our story, and that will be discovering a place which is called the Garden Tomb. I'm going to show you this one. We spoke about Mount Calvary. We need to be honest about that. This place was not known until 1878. When we spoke about the crucifixion, the whole Christian world was pointing at one location, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. But in 1878, a British man by the name of General Gordon was walking on the walls of Jerusalem about half a mile away. And as he was walking the wall over there, he could see something down below that looked familiar. It looked like caves which were engraved in the bedrock that form a shape of a skull. Now you do understand that Calvary, Calvaria in Latin, means skull, which means Golgotha in Aramaic. And he thought to himself, well, that's interesting. Let me go a little closer to investigate. And lo and behold, there was a tomb over there, and there was a little garden and a wine press. He was the one that pointed to the place as a possible location for Mount Calvary. So from 1878, part of the Christian world is going to celebrate the crucifixion, the resurrection in that location. So all that happened when the Ottomans were still controlling the city. And from that point on, until this very day, it's a private fund based in London, which is called the Garden Tomb Association. And if you've been to Jerusalem, I'm sure that you visited and also celebrated communion at the Garden Tomb, which is the highlight of every tour that comes to Israel. So that was also part of the Ottoman story of Jerusalem. And look what the great monuments and buildings were built by Christian superpowers, just to point at some. This will be a place called the Dormition Abbey. I did mention earlier that some Christians do believe that Mary died, and some believe that she fell asleep and then she had ascended. So this place is called Dormition, after dormire, to fall asleep. It's a building built by the German Kaiser Wilhelm II in 1910, just by the upper room. You do see another big building built with German money, the Church of the Redeemer. You do see the Russian compound built by Tsar Alexander I. You do see the Notre Dame Hospital or hotel today that was built by France, Napoleon III. All those monuments, they just grow one after the other instantly outside the walls of Jerusalem. Everything changes. When we spoke about a turning point, that's what I meant basically. And you see the list of those main structures, and just a list, just a partial list that were built outside the walls of Jerusalem. And that will lead us now to the last chapter that we're going to cover, and that will be Jerusalem under the British mandate, and then a city divided and a city reunited. And that will take us all the way to the end of our seminar. And as you see, you can't go any further up on this ladder. That's it. We started here, and now we are here. Let's start with the British mandate. Quite an interesting story. 400 years of Ottoman domination of Jerusalem about to come to an end during WW1. The war started, and Jerusalem suffered quite badly because the Jews, believed to be not loyal to the Ottoman Empire, Jews were expelled from Jerusalem. Demographics had changed as well, and then something happened. General Edmund Allenby, who was a high British official that served in Europe, he was the executive chief officer, if you wish, or one of the chief officers of General Gort, who was the British commander, lost his son in France, and he was asking to be relocated or recommissioned in Palestine. They sent him over to Palestine to command the British forces in the area, and as he took control over the British army, and that was October of 1917, he made a promise. By Christmas this year, he said, I'm going to give Jerusalem as a gift for the Christian world. That was quite an ambitious proclamation to make, but he kept his promise. British army was fighting against the Turks in the area of Gaza and Beersheba, trying to break through the lines of the Ottomans time after time with no success. And then they decided to play a trick on the Ottoman army, and this one was working. They sent a party of British senior officers that got closer to the Ottoman lines. They opened fire, injured one of them, and as the British officers fled, mounted on the horses, somebody dropped a bag. It was all done deliberately, and the bag had maps that showed in details the next invasion of the British army. The focus was on the city of Gaza, coming from Gaza because it's right on the sea, which means the British Navy can really assist by support fire. It made a lot of sense. In much haste, the Ottomans evacuated the forces from Beersheba, and the final assault came from Beersheba. So that's what the trick that opened the lines of the Ottomans, and General Allenby did keep his promise, and by Christmas that year, Jerusalem was in Christian hands once again. The city was conquered by the British Army in December 9th of 1917. Let me share with you part of the story, and how shall I say that? It's a true story, okay? Although it sounds absolutely ridiculous, I'm sharing a true story with you. As the front brigade was approaching the city, look at me for a minute, what's over there is not that important. The the lieutenant colonel of the leading regiment really wanted some scrambled eggs for breakfast. So he sent his cooks into the nearby village and asked them, find some eggs, I'm really craving an omelet. The two cooks went into a town, and they could not find any eggs, but they saw a party coming from Jerusalem, and this party was kind of carrying a white banner led by the mayor of Jerusalem, and the mayor informed the two British cooks that the Ottoman army fled from the city, and the city surrenders. So the first time Jerusalem surrendered was to two British cooks. That was quite humiliating. They went back home, and told the lieutenant colonel, sorry, no omelet, but we can give you Jerusalem. And the general or the colonel was so upset because the city should surrender at least to a colonel and not to two cooks. So he sent the cooks back to the city to find the mayor to arrange a decent ceremony, and the city surrendered for the second time. Well, he reported to his commanding officer, General Shee from Australia, and General Shee was really offended. Jerusalem has to surrender at least to a general. So the two cooks were sent back to town, a true story, okay, to try to find the mayor. And for the third time, Jerusalem surrendered. Allenby himself was in Hebron. And when he heard that Jerusalem surrendered, he said, no, just a minute now. I made a promise. Jerusalem should surrender to the supreme officer. They should surrender to me. So once again, the cooks were sent into town. It's December, a very cold season. They couldn't find the mayor, who died of ammonia, standing outside in the cold weather 3 times in a row. A little too much for him. And the British army officially conquered the city when General Allenby entered the city, getting off his horse, and that will be the ceremony that was held in December 9th of 1917, a new era in the city's history. Well, here's the mayor, and this is the second surrender, okay? The 2 others, and that will be the final one outside the walls of the citadel, inside the area of Jaffa Gate. Jerusalem now is in the hands of the British, and we have the historical sources tell us when the rumor spread all over Europe, the church bells were ringing out of happiness and jubilee. Once again, Jerusalem is in Christian hands. Interesting to note that when Allenby, before he came into town, he got off the back of his horse and walked inside, saying that no Christian should enter Jerusalem in an arrogant manner, mounted on a horse, when Jesus suffered and was crucified. I'm telling you the story because a few years earlier, in 1898, the German Kaiser came to visit Jerusalem, and he insisted that he's entering the city on his beautiful white stallion. And he said the German emperor is not entering Jerusalem through a dark, narrow gatehouse. He insisted that the whole section of the wall will be breached, especially for him, and that breach is still there until this very day. The walls of the city have one gap, all right, that was made by the Ottomans to honor the Kaiser, and today that's the only road you can drive a car inside the old city just by Jaffa Gate. Some of you may remember Jaffa Gate area. You do not see that tower anymore there. This one was removed by the British. That's the area of Jaffa Gate today. This one is no longer there. This clock tower was one of three that were donated, given by France to celebrate the 25th anniversary of the Sultan, Abdul Hamid II. France likes to give gifts, all right, to America as well. And they gave three such clock towers. One is in Jaffa, still standing. One is in Akko, and one was above Jaffa Gate. This one was simply removed by the British. It was a manifestation of Ottoman power. The British didn't like it, so today the Jaffa Gate area doesn't have that clock tower anymore. So when the British are occupying the city, it's going to change everything because the British had a sense to protect places, to conserve places, to build places in a European standard, and that will happen outside the walls of Jerusalem. The city is going to look totally different than what it did until then. The first governor of Jerusalem, a gentleman by the name of Ronald Simon, was responsible to design a master plan and to make Jerusalem a modern city. Part of the building code in Jerusalem until this very day, all right, was written by General Ronald Simon. You need to know that every house in Jerusalem is paved by the Jerusalem stone. In my country, everything is made of concrete and stone, not of timber. In Jerusalem, the facing of the structures, all of them, 99% of them, are covered by the local stone. It's a tough limestone called dolomite, which is quarried on the mountains of Jerusalem. It protects the buildings much better. The walls are very thick. Jerusalem can be a cold place, not Spokane cold, but cold. Since the walls are so thick, you don't really need central heating because it's nice and pleasant inside. Summers can be very hot. Many houses don't have AC, there's no need, because the walls are so thick and there's good insulation, so the thick walls basically are protecting the structure. And when you come to visit Jerusalem after the first rain around November, when it washes all the dust from the stones, the city kind of sparkling, especially at sunset, it's really nice to see. So this is part of the building code until this very day. Stores also decided that everything that was built on the walls of the city should be removed because it was important archaeologically. Nothing is built closer to the walls until this very day. The walls have to be seen. So Great Britain was the one that started this new approach about the walls of Jerusalem and how to conserve and protect the city. Once again, this is the Jaffa Gate area. These structures were removed, they're no longer there. The tower was removed as well. You do see this whole area. This was a whole neighborhood that was built on the walls of the city. The wall was simply the back wall of new houses. All these were removed and no longer there. And therefore, since the early 20s of the 20th century, the walls of Jerusalem are visible, can be seen from all around, and nobody can build anything closer to the walls or higher than the walls till about half a mile away from every corner. So Jerusalem is well protected and well conserved, so to speak, until this very day. Here is the tower that was removed. You don't see it here anymore. And all this neighborhood was also removed. So the wall today is visible, the full length and height of it. All these was simply cleared by the British. This is Damascus Gate. If you've been to Damascus Gate recently, it's about 50 feet deeper today, removing all that dirt. Everything was done by the British to bring Jerusalem and the walls of it to what it was when the Ottomans built the city walls in the 16th century. And of course, a lot of construction took place as well. Most of it will be of religious nature. just to point at some of the main buildings in Jerusalem. That will be the center of the Church of Scotland. It was built in 1927 to commemorate the Scottish casualties of the British Army in the campaign over Palestine. It's the Church of St. Andrew, the patron saint of Scotland. And the flag, how to see, it's a black flag with a white cross on it. And this is the Church of Scotland and its center in Jerusalem. There's a plaque inside that tells the story of one Robert the Bruce. If you saw the movie Braveheart with Mel Gibson about 25 years ago or so, he's mentioned there. King of Scotland died 1324 and asked in his will to be buried in Jerusalem. Well, as far as we know, never was buried in Jerusalem, but there was a plaque inside that tells the story of the bond of the people of Scotland and Jerusalem. I do not know any other nation that had kings that were called Davids. All right, so David was a crown name of some kings of Scotland. So that's the connection between this church and the Scottish people. You do see the beautiful facade of the brand new church in the Garden of Gethsemane, the Church of All Nations. This one was built 1924. This year they planned the massive celebrations, not going to happen because of the war. There are no tourists, nobody's coming. So that really was kind of a blow in the face, but they did plan a lot of celebrations to commemorate the building. It's called the Church of All Nations because 12 Christian nations that fought against each other during the First World War donated money to build the church. So this is the Church of Gethsemane, or the Church of All Nations, built in the days of the British Mandate. This will be the Rockefeller Museum. Yes, we have one in Jerusalem. The beautiful YMCA complex, the King David Hotel, that will be the headquarters of the British Mandatory Authorities in Jerusalem. As you can see in a short time, lots of construction takes place, and the main one will be the High Commissioner's Palace. This one is built on top of a hill overlooking Jerusalem. Today, it's housing the headquarters of the United Nations for the Middle East, which are occupying this building. So that's an example about massive construction that took place during the days of the British Mandate, which leads us now to the termination of the mandate, and that will be in 1948. The last British commissioner, Sir Alan Cunningham, is leaving the Haifa port. That will be the ceremony in Jerusalem, and look how the city used to look like. When the British were still in town, the war between the Jews and the Arabs had started already. If you are in church this morning, that's when I started my presentation, the War of Independence. So Jerusalem will be the focal point of it. Everything was covered by barbed wire, and when the British left, the war for Jerusalem started. The Jewish forces were very few in number and not well organized to be attacked by 7 Arab armies. That, of course, with Jerusalem was the focal point of the attack. We had a hard time to protect the city. We had to use our limited resources to stop the invasion of the Jordanian army and the Egyptian and the Syrian and the Iraqi and the Lebanese. And Jerusalem paid the price in a way because we did not have enough forces to liberate the whole city. But the city came under a siege. That was the main road that connected Tel Aviv way down in the west with Jerusalem. And since the Arab forces were all around the city came under siege, and people almost starved to death. We tried to break through that blockade time after time by carrying food and water by these trucks over there. Some of them made their way through. Some were stopped by the Arab militias outside. The city almost came down to its knees. Interesting that what saved Jerusalem in 1948 were the biblical water cisterns. We spoke about it the other day. Because when rain falls in the city, the water finds its way to go down to the old cisterns. And since there was no water in the city, that was the way to get some water. Here people are waiting in line, all right, just to fill up some water. It was indeed the biblical cisterns that protected the city. That's how these pile of stones look like to block the road from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. And these are the Jordanian legionnaires deployed on the walls of the old city, firing at the Israeli militias down there. Just an idea about the condition of Jerusalem during the war of 1948. Well, since we understood that we do not have enough forces to occupy all of the city, at least we tried to have the Jewish quarter in our hands, which is within the city walls. Because it was obvious, the one that wins in Jerusalem wins the war as well. There was no point to have a Jewish state after 2,000 years of exile without Jerusalem as its capital. Jerusalem got most of the attention, and the battle for Jerusalem was the most bitter one in the war of 1948. And our success was partial. We were hoping, if not all of the old city, at least the Jewish quarter. And we tried time after time to break through. That was in vain. The Jewish quarter did surrender, and that's how the war came to an end, by a divided city between Jordan and Israel. These are the Jewish people, the Jewish quarter, going to Jordan to basically to be kept there as prisoners of war. They were sent back to Israel about half a year later. The Jewish quarter was in total ruins. What was still standing above ground was destroyed by the Jordanians deliberately to make a message. Jews will not live ever again in the old city of Jerusalem. Well, they were wrong, because in 1967 we came back, and we came back big time. I'll show you how it looks like today. So for 19 years, Jerusalem is going to be a city which is divided between Israel and Jordan. And here is the line that divided the city into two. That will be the old city that was in Jordanian hands. That will be the new part of town, the Israeli part of town, and that will be part of Jordan basically. It's important to note that this is the old city, okay? That the Mount of Olives has the largest Jewish cemetery in the world. About 150,000 people are buried on the Mount of Olives. It's a Jewish cemetery. If you've been to Jerusalem, you walk down the Palm Sunday Road, you're walking through the cemetery basically. Ended up in Jordanian hands. And they couldn't care less about treating it well, about maintaining anything. Jews had no access to that. We had no access also to go to the Western Wall, which is here, because it was now in Jordanian territory, and they denied any access from Jews to go to the Western Wall and to pray and worship by the Western Wall. The Jordanians paved the road that connected Jericho, someplace down here with Jerusalem, and the road was going along the graveyard, destroying thousands of tombstones just to make room for the road, and we have no idea what tombs were destroyed. It was not well recorded, not well documented. We know that the tombs of thousands of people were destroyed by the Jordanians when they paved the road to connect Jericho and East Jerusalem. That would be the line between the two countries, simply the armistice, all right? The Jordanian side and the Israeli side. Israel did proclaim West Jerusalem as capital. We'll get to that in just a minute. It was an enclave of Israeli forces in Jordanian territory, Mount Scopus. All of this is Mount of Olives. The northern peak is Mount Scopus. That's how the war ended. And it's quite crazy to think that, but you're walking today along the wall. This was Israel, this was Jordan, and that will be a buffer zone when Israelis saw the patrolling while Jordanian snipers were deployed on top of the walls of the old city. For 19 years, Jerusalem was indeed a divided city. Jews had no access to the Western Wall or to the cemetery. All that changed as a result of another war, the War of 1967. There was only one crossing point between the two parts of town, and that was especially for UN personnel. Israeli police officers will go through once every 2 weeks to replace the people who were deployed on this enclave on top of Mount Scopus. Diplomats, clergy, but nobody would cross from one side to the other. It was indeed a very inconvenient situation, and it led to some kind of ridiculous stories. One of the buildings, the Notre Dame de France, was right on the line between the two parts of town. And there was a balcony. The balcony was above the buffer zone. One afternoon, a local nun went out to enjoy the view, and a sudden breeze came and she sneezed, and her false teeth flew out of her mouth into the buffer zone, a true story. That led to an international crisis. Who will go to rescue the teeth of the poor nun? It's in a minefield in the buffer zone. People need to find an answer. The whole conference had to held together from both sides to make a decision. Who is going to move the barbed wire? Who is going to clear the mines? Because the poor nun needs her teeth. I know it sounds ridiculous, but such a situation leads to more ridiculous situations. One building, the pub that was on the second floor, was above the line. Basically, when you went to have your drinks, you were in Jordanian territory. And that was a British, basically, gentleman club for a while. And when the British left, it was an Israeli one. And some people just refused to go because if you go there, it's a violation of the ceasefire. You're going beyond the armistice, you're in Jordanian territory, and that will be not well taken You understand my point here. Kids used to play football, you kick the ball goes over the wall, it's in another country, you're not going to see it again. So the city was indeed divided, and you do see the sandbags over here, and there was a whole concrete wall that went through town. Meanwhile, in West Jerusalem, the state of Israel officially proclaimed Jerusalem as capital. That proclamation was done December 5th of 1949. There was a debate because many people in Israel back then thought that maybe Tel Aviv is a better place that represents the modern state of Israel. Jerusalem is old, it's the old Jewish world. We're all about the new type of a Jew. We are a modern people, and Jerusalem does not really represent us. Maybe Tel Aviv will. Well, that was absolutely nonsense. It's Jerusalem. Must be Jerusalem. And after a short debate, the parliament did decide that we are going to proclaim Jerusalem as our capital, just the west part of town. If you proclaim Jerusalem as capital, it's a violation of a UN resolution. Resolution 181, I mentioned that this morning, is the one that led to the creation of Israel, and that resolution said that the city of Jerusalem should be an international city and not the capital of any of the countries, Jew or Arab. When Israel proclaimed Jerusalem as capital, since it was a violation, to protest that proclamation, all the embassies left Jerusalem and went down to Tel Aviv. We did not have a single embassy until President Trump, in May of 2018, officially recognized Jerusalem as capital, moving the embassy back to Jerusalem. We are thankful for that, obviously. That was a breakthrough because other countries, are moving the embassy to Jerusalem. One problem is that President Trump never said the United City of Jerusalem or just West Jerusalem. It sounds like a nuance. To say that the U.S. is recognizing Jerusalem as a capital, it's a great statement. What we are missing is one word, the United Jerusalem as capital. That will seal the deal, all right? So the idea was Jerusalem without specifying, is it West Jerusalem as it was until 1967, or maybe the United City. I'm not complaining. We're happy with that resolution because it was a breakthrough. And today we have the Embassy of Paraguay, not being cynical, and Guatemala, and Australia, Romania, Brazil, the Czech Republic, Argentina made a promise to move the embassy. They did not, but they do officially recognize Jerusalem as a united capital of Israel for eternity. So that would be the position of the city today. But for a long time, we had no embassies in Jerusalem because of that proclamation. And meanwhile, in 1966, the strongly fought democracy, the Knesset, the parliament, was built. Let me show you how it looks like. Our system is not quite like the one in America. We are a parliamentary democracy, and that will be the stronghold of our democracy. And I have to be cynical. In my country, we do not appreciate our politicians that much, and therefore we don't trust many of them. But as a democracy, that will represent the people of Israel, 120 members in the House, only one House. And you do see the way it was designed. The wall at the background looks like the Western Wall of Jerusalem. That's the meaning behind that structure over there. It's all made of Jerusalem stone, and that will be the hall where the Knesset, or the parliament, the assembly, is getting together. The section over there is dedicated for the president. The president of Israel is not a political figure. The president is supposed to be above controversy. He's not a politician. He represents the nation. All right? So he's not part of the political hustle and bustle. All the power is in the hands of the prime minister. So parliamentary democracy, the prime minister is the one that's supposed to form a coalition or to create a government. The president is not part of all of that, although officially he's the one that authorizes the prime minister to form that government. I won't go into details because it will take a long time. It's a mess, all right? Our system is definitely a mess. You know what they say? Wherever they find two Jews, you'll find three opinions. And that really is manifested in our politics. Idea is simple. Out of 120 members, in order to have a government, you need to have 61 members in the House. When we go to elections, that happens every 4 years theoretically, somebody has to create a coalition of 61 members. I'll give you an example of our current government. The party of Mr. Netanyahu won most of the vote, but it's only 31 votes, which means you need to find another 30 at least to form a coalition, because you need to have 60 plus 1. Otherwise, you don't have a majority. So you start negotiating with other parties, and you try to lure them, if you wish, to your coalition. And during those negotiations, you have to compromise the principles which in their behalf people voted for you. And parties have to be very flexible to an embarrassing level just to find a common agenda to join the coalition. And you are being blackmailed by your comrades because without their support, you don't have a government. And in Israel, very cleverly and sadly, much power is given to the ultra-Orthodox. We speak about people who are Jews, people that do not have a national agenda, people that believe that the state of Israel is not part of God's plan. Let me try to explain that. It's easy to understand how an Arab will be anti-Israeli. But how come a Jewish man, woman will be anti-Israeli? Well, it depends on your political convictions. The idea is that the regathering of the nation back to the ancient homeland should be done not by armies and not by bloodshed and not by wars. It should happen in the blink of a second by God Himself and peacefully. And once the regathering is completed, it will bring peace to the region. The argument is that Israel was born through war and bloodshed and victims and casualties. There is no peace in the region, and therefore the state of Israel doesn't have the right to exist as a secular democracy. They want to see a theocracy. So if you call yourself an ultra-Orthodox, that will be your conviction. And this population grows very fast, and they're part of politics, and very cleverly, they are the swing vote in almost every government in the last 40 years. So if you want to form a government, you have to have the ultra-Orthodox on your side. And they're going to blackmail you. They say it loud and clear. We don't care about the state. We just need money for our students to keep studying. They don't serve in the army. Many of them are not working. The contribution to the country is zero. Yet they take so much resources just to have a coalition. And now we are in the same situation, to connect that with my message from this morning, that you won't have it anymore. If you live in a country, you need to take part of the obligations. We will not tolerate hundreds of thousands of youngsters in great condition that choose not to serve in the army. We need them in the army. It will lead to a crisis. It may won't end peacefully, but we are determined. There's one country, everybody should be part of the responsibilities. If you want to enjoy the benefits, be part of the obligations as well. So far, the ultra-Orthodox are not carrying any of the weight, and this is quite a burden sometimes, just to have a state in such a crazy neighborhood as the Middle East. So the ultra-Orthodox are always a problem, I would say, and they also are the swing vote. I wrote about the Knesset building. State of Israel was founded in 1948, and it is a parliamentary democracy, which means that the power is in the hands of the prime minister. Although the head of the state is the president, he's a key figure, but he's a symbolic figure as well. He's supposed to be above controversy and not a political player. So the prime minister will be the most significant player in the system in this country. Please keep in mind that the founding fathers of this nation did not come from great democracies. Most of them came from Eastern Europe, from Poland and Russia, and most people who live in Israel today were coming from countries that knew nothing about democracy. And therefore, to be one was a choice made by the founding fathers of the state, and all things considered, it is working. There's always crisis, there are always problems. We're not perfecting the system to what it could be, but it's working. Behind me is the Knesset building. The Knesset means the assembly, and it's named after the great Knesset that was assembled by Moses in the desert, gathering 70 elders among the tribes of Israel, and that it was the name of the main body of legislators in Israel, the 4th, 3rd century BCE, replaced by the Sanhedrin, which is the Greek term for the assembly. The Knesset has 120 members in it, and they come from different parties, and theoretically, every 4 years we have elections. That's how the system is working, only one house in the system, and behind me, therefore, is the stronghold of our democracy. The building itself was built in 1966, and this was a year before the Six-Day War. Jerusalem was a small town back then, surrounded almost 360 by the Jordanian army. and therefore some of the government offices and some of the sessions of the parliament took place in Tel Aviv, for example. Jerusalem was not a very safe place. Only a year after this building was officially inaugurated, the Six-Day War changed everything, and of course today there's no threat on Jerusalem, and the whole area is in Israeli hands, which made it possible to start expanding the city as well. Until 1967, Jerusalem's population was barely 150,000. Today it's close to 1 million. So 1967 was a turning point that changed everything in the life of the nation, and of course in the life of Jerusalem as well. The city has a lot of struggles today, and although it's officially united, it's very much divided as well. From 1967, the population is made of 60% of Jews and 40% of Arabs. But if you combine the population of the Arabs plus ultra-Orthodox in Jerusalem, you have a majority in our capital of people that do not believe in the right of Israel to exist as a secular democracy, and this is a very awkward situation. And therefore today there is an effort to try to bring more people to town, people that do support the state of Israel, let's call them Zionists, just to make sure that in the future possible solution, the city may end as a divided town. God forbid, who knows how that may develop. Demographics is basically everything, and that's the main struggle of Jerusalem today. Jerusalem is the poorest city in the country. If so many people are not working but spend a lifetime in studying like the ultra-Orthodox, they're not paying taxes. The city could not sustain itself by taxpayers' money. So the government has a special budget just to make sure that the city can function. And interestingly, that the ultra-Orthodox population and the Arab one are growing much faster than all the others. So in a democracy, you're limited. You cannot order people not to have children. But you can create certain circumstances to encourage people to come. Tax benefits, create jobs, lower the prices of rent and the price of property. So Israel is struggling now to create a situation in which the city has indeed a big majority of people that are supporting the state and now working and fighting for the state, because right now our capital is in an awkward situation. The majority of people in Jerusalem, I know it sounds crazy, are people that do not believe in the right of Israel to exist as a secular democracy. It's quite a dangerous situation. We try to change that. Lots of construction. Obviously, we saw the Knesset Israel Museum, all right, is right here, rated as one of the top 10 museums in the world. The Supreme Court of the State of Israel, all the government offices are located in the city. Indeed, this is the center of the politics in the country, not of industry. That will be Tel Aviv. All the finances are in Tel Aviv. So Jerusalem will be the capital with some of the national monuments in it. As I did mention earlier, when the old city was conquered by the Jordanians, it was totally leveled to the ground. And when we liberated East Jerusalem in June 7th of 1967, there was an opportunity not only rebuild the old city or the Jewish quarter, but also to excavate. When you visit the Jewish quarter of Jerusalem today in the old city, under your feet, there is a whole subterranean town, which is part of the excavations that will take you down to the Roman city and down to the Israelite city from the days of Hezekiah. Think about the excitement of Jewish archaeologists excavating not a foreign country, but the homes of our ancestors. And you find by Hezekiah's wall Assyrian helmets, and you open the Bible, bang, it's all there. So under the present street level in the Jewish quarter, there was a whole town buried under it, which takes us back at least 2,000 years in time. 1967, Israeli paratroopers were breaking through Stephen's Gate over here. That's how the Western Wall used to look like back at the time. There was no big plaza. This is quite a famous picture some of you may recall, just outside or by the Western Wall. Here are the three main generals, Yitzhak Rabin, the chief of general staff, Moshe Dayan, you know the name, and the commander of Jerusalem. All these are famous pictures for us Israelis. That's what reminds us of the great victory of 1967. In the east part of town, the west part of town, the Knesset building once again, Israel Museum, and these are some of the main establishments. And down here is a religious theological academy, all right? We have hundreds of those all around the city filled with students that all they do, they study. That's what they do. Many do not work. If you're bright enough to spend a lifetime in study, that's your commission. And many of them take full advantage of that. And as I said, their contribution to the country is basically zero, as well as to the city of Jerusalem. Let me show you the Jewish quarter or the city of today, and then a short picture of the Jewish quarter. This is taken from the Jaffa Gate area during COVID, so there's not much traffic as you will see. Traffic in Jerusalem is quite a nightmare. All right, so this is something that you do not see when you look at the skyline of Jerusalem 3 years ago or so. That will be the King David Hotel that we saw earlier, and you see some new high-rise of the city. Kind of skyline is totally changing. They changed the building code. Today, if you want to build a house in Jerusalem, it has to be 30 stories and higher. 30 stories is the minimum, just to attract more people to come to town. And since the space is limited, one way is to start building up in the air. Give me 3 more minutes and we'll bring that to conclusion. So that's how part of the town center looks like. This is the west part of town, the Jewish part of town, and this is taken from the east part of town, from the walls of the city of Jerusalem. That's how the Jewish quarter used to look like when it was in Jordanian hands, a total destruction, and that will be part of the excavations after 1967, and that's how the Jewish quarter looks like today. It's a beautiful place, lots of great pizza places and coffee shops. Some of you may remember small shops over there, very pleasant place to come and visit, and everything was built on the ruins, if you wish, of the town that was developed by the Jordanians. And right under your feet here, there's a whole subterranean city and town, which takes us back to the Roman city, etc. By the way, there was a mosque in the Jewish quarter that we did not destroy. How interesting. The Jordanians got rid of all the synagogues. There was a mosque over there from the 14th century. It stands by the central synagogue. This is the central plaza of the Jewish quarter of Jerusalem of today, which was built right above the ruins that the Jordanians left behind in the war of 1948. Maybe the most famous part of the city is by the Western Wall. You do know the picture, the Western Wall of Temple Mount. That's how the new parts of town look like. Jerusalem has some beautiful sections in it. And again, the city is really struggling. Let me show you this one, all right? We have one gated community in the city, the most expensive part of town. It's called David's Village. And you do see the Jerusalem stone is everywhere. Property in this part of town will be easy between $2 and $3 million, all right? And these are condos, basically. A house will be about 150 square meters at the most. So Jerusalem is an expensive place. Property in the city is expensive because Jewish people from all around the world are willing to pay and invest money that the locals don't have. So you understand the frustration here. The building construction goes on all the time. We do not enjoy that because Jewish money is coming in from Canada and the US and Australia. They buy the property for a rainy day. Nobody lives there, by the way. You come at night, there's no lights in the windows. They come to visit once every year or so. So this is an investment made by people just in case you need a shelter to run for your country. Many parts of the country look like that. And this will be the west part of town as well. You see, there's no traffic. That was one blessing during COVID. There was no traffic in the city, which was indeed a blessing. This is Jaffa Road, the main one that goes from Jaffa Gate, someplace over there, all the way to Jaffa, down by the Mediterranean Sea. And that will be the closing video to share with you. And I owe you 10 minutes, and I'm not going to give it back to you, all right? But if you thought about any questions that you may have about the last 3 evenings that we spent going through the city's history, I do want to invite you to ask your question, dedicate a few minutes for that, and then you will be free to enjoy the rest of the evening. Ladies and gentlemen, our tour of Jerusalem is coming to an end. I hope that you enjoyed it, number one. I hope that you learned a few things. And I do hope that you are encouraged now to do your own studies. This was just in a nutshell. There's so much information out there. But the best education you can get is come to Jerusalem. Walk the streets of the city. I know, now it's not a good time. Let's wait until things will calm down. And Pastor Ken is leading almost every year a group from the church. Many of you have been there. I know many of your faces. And I think that you all agree, it is indeed the trip of a lifetime. So to get to know the city better, and maybe to increase the level of your knowledge of the Bible, coming to Israel will add to your level of understanding. And this is indeed a great experience. And of course, the focal point of everything is indeed Jerusalem, as I was trying to point at in the last 6 hours. 6 hours, boy, that's a lot of time. If you have any questions whatsoever about what we shared, it will be a good time to. I wasn't even asking Pastor Ken's permission to do that. So let's just have 1 or 2 questions, and then you'll be officially dismissed. Any questions at all? Yes, sir.
Just to draw on your comments
I will repeat the question.
about the ultra-Orthodox, I heard, and I want to ask you if you think this is true, that there are ultra-Orthodox Jews in New York City who are protesting with the pro-Hamas protesters because of just what you were saying.
Yeah, was the question, how do I, let me rephrase it, all right? In New York City, there are ultra-Orthodox Jews that are siding with Hamas against Israel. How do I explain that? Well, I think that I did already. And these people are so hateful toward the state of Israel because what they say is that we are interfering in God's grand plan how to run this universe. We took matters into our own hands, and that makes God very unhappy. Some of the rabbis are teaching, not all but some, that the Holocaust was God punishing his people because they took matters into their hands and they wanted to build a country. You know how painful it is for me to say that. They accuse people like myself, a devout Zionist, that I lost my family in Europe, and I did lose most of them because of my conviction to live as a free people and free nation in my ancient homeland. So no wonder why some of them will take officially the anti-Israeli side. In the Palestinian parliament, I kid you not, there was 1 seat for an ultra-Orthodox Jew. In the Palestinian parliament, there are people in Israel that support the Palestinians. Yes. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
When we were on tour with you in 2022, when we got to go to Bethlehem, you had to leave the bus. I'm still confused. There was some agreement where Jews would not enter.
Well, the question was that when a team was in Israel 2022 and you went to visit Bethlehem, I was not with you. I got off the bus before we crossed to Bethlehem. That is indeed the case. Bethlehem is Palestinian territory, and tour guides are permitted. You need to have permission to go in, and I choose not to, all right? I don't have to go in. As a reservist, I used to serve in the Bethlehem area. Some people know my face, and who knows who wants to get even with me for shooting his cousin 25 years ago, who knows what. It's a risk that I choose not to take. All right, that's the only reason why I'm not going into Bethlehem, although Israeli tour guides do go. You didn't have to switch the bus. Same bus led you in and was a Jewish driver. That was a more of personal issue than anything that you can call really a big story, a big issue. I just choose not to go to places where people hate me. Well, you felt safe and positive because they want tourism, and they welcome tourism. But for somebody like myself, I have to reconsider, all right, visiting places like Bethlehem. But again, this is just a personal matter and nothing to do with the big story. Well, folks, thank you so much. And Pastor Ken, once again, thank you for the opportunity. I hope that you are better educated now. And my reward will be, I kid you not, if you go back home, not tonight, and do some studies. Study about Jerusalem, study about the Middle East. Don't trust anything, all right? And if you need some advices, please don't email me. Many people ask me questions about theology. I'm not a theologian, all right? And Pastor Ken will kill me for that. Check with him. He can answer all of your questions about theology, all right? So here is the man over there. I'm sorry, Pastor. But again, I do not do theology. And again, questions of that nature, I'm sorry, I'm not going to provide with any answers, you understand? Check with me about history. I think I know most of the answers to your questions, and not all of them. So thank you for your attention. It was a pleasure indeed. I'm just so tired that I hope that the message was kind of coherent and you were able to follow some of the information. Thank you so much.
What's that? Sorry about. I just want to know why you shot him.
Maybe I did.
Maybe you did. You're not admitting anything. Anyway, If you would like, they're going to run the video from the Caesarea Amphitheater that was shown this morning. If you've seen it or haven't seen it, you might enjoy it if you'd like to watch that. I want to pray for Ronnie as he and Talia are leaving early tomorrow morning to fly to San Francisco. I got him a poop map, and so he's ready. But let's pray for Ronnie. Lord God, I thank you for all that Ronnie has shared, and we thank you for his friendship with us and with this community of believers. Lord, we just pray that you'd watch over, protect them, guide them. We pray for the peace of Jerusalem, Lord. We pray that you would allow the captives to be set free in any way that you choose, Lord, but we pray that it would be soon. We just thank you, Lord, for the kindness and grace that you show to us as your people. And we pray that you show that kindness and grace to Israel. In Jesus' holy name, amen.